Ban Yu-won faced countless demons and cut them down without slowing. Steel flashed again and again as arrows flew toward him, but he only felt contempt. He believed they relied too much on numbers and surprise, and that belief made them weak. He lifted one hand and released his power. A weapon appeared in his grasp after his chant, and he fired without holding back. Demons collapsed in waves as his attack overwhelmed the battlefield. Long before this battle, Yu-won's life had already shown signs of something special. When he was 4 years old, he often sat on the floor reading books that became the center of his world. His mother watched him with pride and told his father that their child was reading in original languages. Neither parent could understand how he knew words from places he had never seen. One day, his grandfather arrived carrying a Yumi and spoke with strong conviction. He declared that the child would reclaim the Tower of Babel for the Ban family. He insisted the tower truly existed and began reading an old book to the boy, planting a destiny that would shape Yu-won's future. Long ago, in a world filled with chaos, the great ancestor of the Ban family held the power to let all people understand one another. With that power, he brought them together and created the Tower of Babel, a tower believed to never fall. When Yu-won was young, he once asked his grandfather in an innocent way if their ancestor had owned a building. His grandfather laughed loudly and explained that their ancestor was not a builder, but the master of language itself, someone who could understand and shape every tongue in existence. He reminded Yu-won that they must never forget the greatness of their bloodline. As time passed, no one knew where the tower existed anymore, yet the family believed that finding it would restore their lost power and honor. While Yu-won grew up, his grandfather continued to fill his mind with stories of that ancestor and the tower. Yu-won quietly wished that his own talent might one day help fulfill that dream, but his ability soon went far beyond what anyone expected. Years later, Yu-won checked his university results and saw that his score was high enough for acceptance. At that moment, the screen suddenly malfunctioned and a strange blue window appeared, covered in unknown symbols that he could somehow understand. It was a message from an academy of another dimension, congratulating him. Before he could fully react, a practical test began, space distorted, and he was pulled into a different world. In the darkness of that place, a blind goblin waited. A task appeared, ordering him to defeat the goblin and destroy the dungeon core. Fear rushed through his body, but the goblin reacted to sound and spoke, revealing that it sensed its prey. Yu-won realized he could understand its words, which made the situation even more terrifying. He forced himself to stay calm, threw a stone far into the dark, and watched as the goblin turned toward the noise. Using that moment, he rushed forward and struck from behind with a bat. His first hunt ended in fear and blood, and with it came his first reward, the power of a higher dimension. The main character froze as a strange feeling spread through his body and the Babylonian code awakened within him. Unknown symbols flowed into his mind and formed a language he understood without effort. 2 goblins lay dead before him, and from their bodies the code drew out clear ideas of demon and life. Many other ideas were still beyond his reach, but these were enough to begin. He soon understood that his power was no longer only about language. He could now pull out concepts themselves. The code guided him to handle the demon concept separately, while the life concept flowed naturally into his body. As he absorbed it, his strength increased at once. His hands felt firmer, his movements became lighter, and his skin grew tougher. A strong sense of confidence rose inside him. The goblin body soon turned into dust, leaving only 2 clubs on the ground. He realized that concepts could be used not only on himself but also on objects around him. With his power fully awakened, he cleared the blind goblin dungeon and passed the special test of the lower dimension. Instead of returning home, he was sent to an unknown place called the Union Academy, where he was accepted as a provisional student. During the interview, he wore the academy uniform with pride and prepared himself to complain about the rough transport that brought him there. Instead, he met Professor Yamina, a beautiful instructor who specialized in magic combat. She congratulated him and calmly explained why the academy had shown interest in him. He had become the first student in 500 years to create an artifact during an evaluation. When he asked about the massive pillar he had seen, Yamina explained that it was the Tower of Babel. The academy existed to gather talents from many dimensions and raise them to challenge that tower, which was known as the greatest dungeon and the source of both mastery and danger. Hearing this, he remembered his grandfather's stories and the lost honor of his family, and in his heart he swore to reclaim the tower one day. After returning home, he trained without rest inside hobgoblin caves. He hunted constantly, absorbing and controlling concepts with ease, and his strength grew with every battle. His first artifact was created from a goblin club filled with concepts, forming a ghostly weapon. When a new concept related to the soul appeared, he fed the club with life, ghost, and spirit. It then transformed into a ghost beast named Eve, a weapon that could change into a gun or a shield while still having its own personality. At the entrance ceremony, he quietly observed the other students using his special sight. Many regular students looked down on him because he came from a lower dimension. However, the special admission group shocked him, as 3 students there possessed overwhelming power. He realized then that life at Union Academy would be far harsher than he had imagined. At the ceremony, Yu-won met his dorm roommate named Slight. Slight was calm and handsome, and Yu-won remembered how this same student had once pointed a sword at him after mistaking him for an intruder during a practical exam. After Slight apologized, the two spoke in a relaxed way and shared their experiences from the evaluation. They soon met the other special admission students. Rachel appeared cheerful and friendly, while Dako-yeon remained quiet and composed, known as the daughter of a famous martial artist. Dako-yeon quickly noticed Eve wrapped around Yu-won's arm. All of them could see it clearly, and they were shocked by how much his artifact had evolved in such a short time. Before long, the group grew close and formed a natural bond. When the ceremony began, the ceiling opened and a crushing pressure poured down from the sky. Most students were forced to lower their heads, unable to endure it. Yu-won alone looked up and saw a massive eye staring down at them. Later, Professor Yamina confirmed that the presents belonged to the academy principal. Everyone was stunned that Yu-won had been able to look directly at him. Dako-yeon explained that the principal usually hid his presence, and Yamina added that Yu-won would not see him again unless he achieved something remarkable or caused serious trouble. Yamina then announced that she would be the homeroom professor for Class 11. She warned them that regular students would feel jealousy towards special admissions. Outside of exams, fights between students were allowed and professors were not permitted to interfere. She advised them to stay together, reminding them that they were future climbers of the tower. After that, she handed each of them an artifact pendant that served as a student identification, access tool, and teleport device. Not long after, Yu-won was summoned by himself. A quiet space with a tea table awaited him. On his very first day at the academy, Yu-won came face to face with the principal. The principal met Yu-won in a quiet space and explained that his true body was not present, asking Yu-won to address him as master. He shared his way of thinking and said he never interfered with students. The weak remained weak, while the strong were free to grow. To him, death and glory held no meaning, and his only wish was to see someone reach the end of the tower. When Yu-won questioned why everyone climbed the tower and what it truly represented, the master explained that it was the road to the divine and a trial spoken of in legends. Although he avoided interference, he chose to make an exception this time, as Yu-won held the greatest potential he had ever witnessed. The master then expanded Yu-won's authority and allowed him to freely explore external dungeons outside the academy grounds. He promised that if Yu-won's growth continued to impress him, he would later grant him permission to challenge the tower alone. After the meeting ended, Yu-won suddenly found himself back at the academy and fell onto Yumina's lap. Embarrassed, he quickly stood up, and Yamina calmly explained that the principal always dismissed people in such a manner. She also revealed that she had been waiting for him from the beginning and that his pendant now allowed him to leave the academy whenever he wished. Yamina explained how rare this freedom was. While professors were bound by many limits, students were granted advantages by the system. She even suggested that he visit the city of Ronica. Yu-won soon traveled there and was greeted by pleasant weather. The city guards recognized him as a Union Academy student and saluted him, thanking the chancellor for protecting their city. When Yu-won checked his inventory, he discovered the gold his grandfather had once given him, a legacy left behind by ancestors who had chased the Tower of Babel. The inventory stored it without issue. Feeling ready at last, Yu-won stepped into another dimension and entered Ronica. The guards approached him again, confirmed his identity, and offered their help. Yu-won then looked up at something flying above the city and calmly wondered about its cost, realizing that he wanted one for himself. Yu-won enjoyed riding the hover bike through the city, feeling the smooth movement beneath him. The bike was far more expensive than the basic models, yet he paid for it with a single large gold bar that held great value in Ronia. As he rode, he felt grateful toward his grandfather for leaving him such wealth. While moving through the streets, Eve spoke to him and suggested turning the bike into a living artifact someday, and even giving it the name Lilith. The idea stayed in his mind as he continued his ride. After finishing everything he needed to do, Yu-won returned to the academy carrying liquor meant for a professor. Later, he lay down to rest, feeling relaxed. Light soon arrived and handed him a glass of water with a disappointed expression, clearly unhappy that Yu-won had left without a word after the meeting and returned drunk. Yu-won explained that it had been his first time drinking and that he could not refuse because Professor Yamina had insisted. Daoko then noticed the badge on Yu-won and recognized it as a sign of a representative role. She questioned it, and Yu-won calmly explained that if they thought of it like a class president role, then Professor Yamina had placed him in charge of the four of them, and they should accept it. Daoko responded that if anyone should represent them, it should be her since she was the strongest. Light immediately became upset and said that was the wrong way to think. He reminded her that they were equal comrades and that such an attitude would only harm their future climb of the tower. He also made it clear that he did not fully agree with her view. Daoko then questioned where equality truly existed, reminding them that just the day before, he had asked the professor for permission to climb the tower alone. Everyone felt disappointed when they realized Light had once wanted to climb the tower alone. Yu-won slammed his head lightly on the table and said that trouble would surely start from the very first morning class. Even though they had tried to talk things through, the group already felt unstable. Yuwon admitted to himself that he never wanted to become class president, and still did not understand why the professor had chosen him. He then raised his hand and explained that a class president did not need to be the strongest person. Daoko questioned his reasoning, and Yuwon calmly explained that if the strongest person became president, they would end up making every decision alone. The role of a president was to unite everyone and find fair answers, not to dominate the group. He believed he was chosen because of his easygoing nature. Daoko stood up and said she would accept his reasoning for now. She added that if something bothered her in the future, and she wanted something badly enough, she would accept even things she disliked. Yuwon felt uneasy and disappointed by how tense the discussion had become, but Light and Rachel stepped in to calm him down. Rachel casually mentioned that she wanted to touch Eve at least once, easing the mood slightly. Yuwon realized that the academy was filled with hidden dangers like landmines, and his first lesson as the class president of Class 11 began with difficulty. Soon, everyone gathered as the professor instructed for their first lesson. Yuwon assumed it would start with light sparring and asked what the class thought. Many students loudly demanded to go first, while Yuwon and Light remained silent. Light quietly told him that the union had grouped students by ability and that the regular students already disliked the special class. Angry stares were directed at them from all sides. One student named Erecto noticed Yuwon badge and reacted with hostility. He openly refused to acknowledge Yuwon's position and demanded permission to test Yuwon's strength. His anger grew as he insisted on sparring with Yuwon. The professor agreed and called Yuwon forward. The first spar of Class 11 was decided, and Yuwon was set to face Erecto. Professor Yamina sat in her office while reviewing the class schedule, and immediately felt uneasy. She noticed that her class was arranged to have a joint session with the special students on the very first day, and the first lesson was comprehensive practical combat. She sensed clear ill intent behind the arrangement, and suspected it was done on purpose, though she did not know who was responsible. During the session, she paired Yuwon with Erecto for a sparring match. Yuwon raised his hand and calmly stated that his combat skills were still lacking and that he would gain nothing from such a match. Yamina dismissed this as an excuse and deducted 3 points from him. Yuwon realized she was intentionally putting him on the spot in front of everyone. He explained that it was not an excuse but a fact, since he had been selected for his unique ability rather than his fighting skill. He added that if she wanted to evaluate his ability, it should be done in a different way instead of forcing him into combat. This response angered the professor even more, and she accused him of lecturing her, deducting additional points. Yuwon let out a quiet sigh and raised his hand once again. He suggested using the current week as preparation time and holding the match the following week instead. His words shocked the entire class. He confidently stated that 1 week was enough because his preparation was nearly complete and he would soon aim for the top. His classmates were stunned and wondered if he truly believed he could face a special class student after just 1 more week. Yamina reacted with sharp anger and accused Yuwon of ignoring her authority and setting the schedule as he pleased. She pointed at both Yuwon and Erecto and announced that they would have an official sparring match the following Tuesday. The match would be public and broadcast across the entire academy. She warned Yuwon that since he asked for preparation time, he had better prove his ability. Before she could finish, Yuwon turned his attention to Erecto and calmly acknowledged their upcoming match, saying he was looking forward to it. He was not seeking courtesy and only wanted to confirm Erecto's strength. As expected from a special class student, Erecto's life and body stats were abnormally high. Yuwon looked at his teammates and sighed, realizing that even compared to them, he was far behind. If he wanted to climb the tower with this group, he would have to surpass even Erecto's level. He asked his teammates why they looked so gloomy, and wondered if they were worried about him. Then he turned to the rest of the class and questioned why no one was stepping forward. Unlike him as class president, shouldn't they be curious about the special admissions students' abilities? He noticed Daoko tying her hair and speaking up. She said that if anyone wanted a challenge, she was ready. The whole class fell silent. Even with his power to read abilities, Yuwon could not fully understand the extent of Dako's strength. Her overwhelming aura was invisible to everyone else. Daoko then called someone out with a hand gesture, pointing at Erecto and claiming she would crush him. Erecto looked terrified. He had originally intended to target Yuwon, not someone as strong as Daoko, and if he stepped forward now, he would be seriously injured. Yuwon stopped her and told her not to act, reminding her that Erecto had a sparring match scheduled with him. If she wanted to fight Erecto, she would have to wait for her turn. Daoko asked if he was sure, and Yuwon explained that he needed to prove his strength using his own abilities. Daoko responded that she had thought he relied on tricks, but perhaps he had some courage after all. She looked at the class and asked if anyone besides Erecto wanted to step up. Silence followed. Daoko sighed and turned away, noting how the class had been so loud just moments ago but none of them would accept the challenge when a real threat appeared. Suddenly, a student sitting behind them spoke up, questioning who Daoko had been calling dogs. He said that the weak and foolish always gathered in packs, stepping forward to protect their small group, and that it was an amusing sight to witness. It was a surprising sight to watch a student snarl and act as if he could protect his group. Yu-won studied him and sensed something unusual about the boy. Even among the special class, he seemed to be on a completely different level. Light explained that the boy was Orima, the ruler of the Kidius dimension. He came from one of the 10 highest hierarchy families across the dimensions. Orima stood up slowly and faced the professor. The professor silently threw a recording device toward him. Light added that everything happening would be shared on the academy internet. Yu-won looked at the device and noted that sharing existed even in this world, surprising Light. Yu-won explained that such systems had been developing in his lower dimension as well. Rachel pointed out a live channel, and Yu-won complimented her for finding it. On the screen, Dako and Orima appeared on the fighting ground, facing each other live. The professor's plan to embarrass them was clear, and things were unfolding exactly as expected. Orima spoke confidently and the fight began. Dako remained calm and allowed the novice the first move. Orima sneered and raised his hand, releasing a terrifying pressure that spread instantly. Everyone felt it and could not resist. The power was different from anything Yu-won had seen before. It moved naturally, like water flowing from high to low ground, distorting the laws of nature. Everything in the area was forced into submission as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yu-won quietly noted that this resembled a distortion of natural law. Light stared in shock, realizing that the principle behind the ability had already been understood. Rachel shook Yu-won's hand in fear, but Dako remained standing. She lifted one hand, and the energy alone was enough to completely erase Orima's pressure, causing his power to collapse instantly. Everyone froze, stunned by what was happening. Orima narrowed his eyes and admitted that some skill existed, but Dako remained cold and dismissive, saying his power was as ridiculous as his horns and that nothing more mattered. Orima raised his hand again, but Dako jumped forward and kicked him in the chest while landing. She explained that an obvious attack became useless after it was used once. Orima staggered and said he would need both hands now, but Dako appeared beside him instantly, and said that lack of thought only forced the body to work harder. Orima attacked in anger but missed completely. Dako grabbed his collar with one hand and blocked his attacking arm with the other, noting that his movements were stiff and clumsy. Her knee struck his face, leaving Light in shock, unable to understand how Orima was being overwhelmed. Yu-won observed calmly and explained that Orima's suppression method was failing. When Light asked for clarification, Yu-won said that Orima relied on distorting natural law to overpower opponents without effort, but that strategy did not work on Dako. He added that Orima had great power and physical ability, yet he never truly used his body. Light was stunned as he watched Dako fight Orima directly while Yu-won analyzed both of their abilities. Dako continued her attacks, leaving Orima no chance to counter. Orima shouted in rage, declaring that the humiliation was unforgivable. Dako remained calm and said that excessive talking only invited removal. Losing control, Orima slammed his hand into the ground, releasing deadly intent and declaring that death would be granted immediately. In the middle of the fight, Orima completely lost control. He shouted that the humiliation he felt would never be forgiven and that death would be delivered immediately. Dako stayed calm as she moved her hand and told him that death was not something a child like him should speak of. She gathered her power for her next move, and Orima also released his energy, shouting that she should die. Suddenly, Professor Yamina appeared and clapped her hands. Both powers vanished instantly, and the battlefield was suddenly covered in flowers. Orima and Dako turned in surprise. Yamina explained gently that students at the academy were not meant to fight to the death. She smiled and said that such resolve was better saved for the tower, and that they should understand this. With a simple gesture, she covered the entire ground with flowers. Yu-won quietly thought it felt almost like a hallucination, though the strong scent of flowers was real. Orima fell silent and returned to his place. Dako turned to Yamina and complimented her strength, and Yamina smiled in response. Dako then nodded and returned to her team. Yu-won welcomed her back and asked how the fight had been. Dako replied calmly, and Yu-won said it was amazing. Suddenly, Rachel grabbed Yu-won and hid behind him. Yu-won asked if she was still afraid and laughed lightly, reassuring her that it was safe to come out. Dako quietly watched the scene. On the other side, Yamina spoke to Professor Farrell about allowing a sparring session to escalate without limits while only watching. Farrell lowered his head, admitting it had been a serious mistake. Yamina turned away, disappointed, and said that an apology would not be enough and that proper preparation was necessary. She then turned to Yu-won and pointed at his badge, reminding him that as class president his dignity mattered and that wearing the badge upside down was unacceptable. Everyone around was shocked, and jealousy began to spread through the crowd. After the fight was stopped, Professor Yamina said goodbye and left. Yu-won looked around and sighed, realizing that although the professor had ended the battle, the situation had grown even more complicated. Soon, discussions about the sparring session and the special admissions students flooded the academy's internet. Yu-won checked the screen and noticed that it seemed like the entire world was talking about the events. Dako thought that it was strange because Orima was considered the top prospect, yet someone else must be even stronger. She mentioned a silver-haired girl from their class as a more capable student, and told Yu-won that he should have noticed this. Yuwon laughed and said that everyone's attention had been on the sparring match. Light checked the internet and noticed that Yuwon's name was also spreading across the school community. While they were talking, he saw Rachel sitting far away and sensed that something was off. Yuwon realized that Rachel's fear of Dako was keeping her distant and decided to use the situation to ease that fear. On the table, a special elixir jam was placed, and Yuwon asked for bread. As bread was passed over, he spread the jam and handed pieces to Light and Dako. From a distance, Rachel smelled the jam and watched carefully. Both Light and Dako tasted it and froze in surprise at how delicious it was. Yuwon simply said that it was good, then gestured for Rachel to come closer. Her mouth watered, and she slowly approached to sit beside Yuwon, asking for a portion. Another piece was prepared and shared, and soon everyone was eating together happily. Dako spoke thoughtfully, saying that the jam felt far too precious. Yuwon calmly replied that sharing good things was best when working as a team and added that it was a return favor for earlier kindness. Suddenly, Dako stood up, grabbed Yuwon's tie, and calmly told him that she had made a decision. She would provide him with personal martial arts instruction in return. Dako and Yuwon were transported into the training room, and the moment they arrived, a strange calm filled the space. Yuwon looked around and wondered if the room reflected her psychological state. Dako walked forward and said that as long as the space was enough to move her body, it was fine. Yuwon asked what she was going to teach him, and she picked up a wooden sword, telling him not to move carelessly. Suddenly, she pointed the sword at him and explained that they would start with a thrust, a move performed without hesitation or doubt. Yuwon was shocked at how powerful and precise the strike was, and in that instant, he discovered a new concept he called penetration. He wondered why such a concept was not discussed more in swordsmanship. Dako told him to focus and pay attention because a thrust did not exist in just one form. She explained that it could be done with a sword, a spear, or even the body, and that the angle of the legs, the posture, or the intent did not matter. She emphasized that she was teaching the most basic and fundamental meaning of a thrust. She moved the sword again and asked about the force behind a thrust, whether it came from aura or strength. Pointing the sword directly at his face, she explained that there were countless variations, but the ultimate basics were simply a thrust and nothing more. Yuwon fell silent, thinking deeply about her words and the idea of ultimate basics. He realized that her mastery of a single concept was far deeper than someone mixing several concepts together, and that this was the essence of a thrust. Dako handed him the sword and asked if he wanted to try. Yuwon moved awkwardly, warning that it would be clumsy, but Dako laughed and said that if he could copy her perfectly from the start, years of her training would have been meaningless. As he swung the sword, her eyes widened, wondering if he had really grasped the concept after seeing it only once. Yuwon focused but realized he could not completely replicate it. He understood that until now he had relied too much on combining concepts, believing power grew by addition. Now he saw that power could also grow by refining what already existed. He removed his coat and thought about the many characteristics of a thrust. He understood why he had grasped penetration. To her, a thrust must pierce its target without fail, making it a deadly move. Exhausted, Yuwon sat down on the ground while Dako told him to stop and not push himself too hard at the start. She added that if he remembered what she had shown him, he should try it later in a larger space and against an opponent he could actually kill. Yuwon froze when he saw his stats, which had increased just from swinging the sword a few times. His penetration concept, which he had only just gained, was already at level 16. Swordsmanship, which had not risen no matter how many goblins he had killed, had finally improved. His overall combat ability had nearly doubled. Dako looked at him and admitted that she had not expected to lose out like this. She said no one would have thought he could display the essence of technique without relying on the form of a weapon. Yuwon smiled awkwardly and said he had only followed her movements without realizing it. Dako replied that if showing something made it easy to understand and imitate, then no one would ever struggle to master anything. Yuwon laughed and agreed, but added that it was because her teaching was so good. He said that watching her movements for the first time, he could sense the profound depth behind them. Dako felt unexpectedly pleased and blushed. Yuwon continued, saying it made him wonder if a person could really train to such a level, and admitted he had been so absorbed in that depth that he lost track of time for a moment. Dako turned away, blushing more and sighing at how easily he said such things despite them not knowing each other long. Yuwon told her teaching had been amazing and that she could leave the elixir to him from now on. She replied that it hardly made up for what she had taught him today. When he asked seriously what he should do then, she smiled and said not to worry and that she would make up for today's loss over time. She told him it was time for the next lecture and left. Yuwon followed, still surprised that she could show such an expression. At the academy, Rachel and Light were walking while using the internet when a student suddenly stopped in front of Rachel and asked where she was from. Rachel froze, panic flashing across her face. And Light quickly grabbed the student's hand to stop him, stepping in front to protect her. The student frowned and asked what was happening. Light angrily said that she was in the same class as him and demanded to know what he wanted with her. The student sneered and told Light that someone like him had no right to interfere and then walked away. Light glared but remained silent. Yu-won and Dako arrived and saw the situation. Yu-won asked why they were standing there instead of going to the lecture. Light did not respond when Yu-won asked what had happened. Inside the lecture room, the professor was teaching about the history of the Union of the Academy. The same group of students who had confronted Rachel sat behind them, taking photos of her from behind and mocking them. They spoke loudly, insulting Light and saying that someone like him had no place trying to climb the tower. Yu-won, sitting next to Light, thought that people were the same everywhere, no matter the place or scale. He glanced at the professor, who showed no reaction to the noise. It was unclear if the professor was ignoring them or simply could not hear. Light stood up and called the professor's attention, explaining that the other students were being noisy and making it difficult to focus on the lecture. The professor loudly replied that there was to be no talking during the lecture and that everyone should focus only on his voice. That was the end of the matter. Yu-won and Light realized that nothing more would be done by the professor. As soon as the professor turned back, the group started mocking Light again. They said he was showing off just because he was good looking and laughed that since he was not dating Rachel, he had no reason to act that way. They even made crude comments about Rachel's body. Light's anger boiled over, and he crushed a pencil in his hand. Yu-won placed a hand on Light's shoulder and told him to calm down. Light asked if it was really acceptable to hold back after hearing such remarks about Rachel. Yu-won explained that causing trouble during class would only make things worse and that pointless actions were unnecessary. Light questioned how that could be pointless, and Yu-won pointed to his phone, explaining that the lecture was being recorded and streamed live on the internet. Eve was also recording them from behind, capturing all the words they were saying. The group panicked when they realized this and started looking around for the camera. Their shouting finally caught the professor's attention. The professor pointed at them and ordered them to state their names and classes and leave the lecture room. They tried to make excuses, but the professor shouted again, and startled, they all ran out. The professor announced that they would receive an F for the entire year and told the rest of the class to focus. Yu-won thought that even the assistant professor was not someone to mess with, and that an F was lenient compared to what they had said to Rachel. Rachel said she was fine and thanked Light and Yu-won for standing up for her. Yu-won replied that there was no need for thanks, as he had not done much and was not stronger than them. He had only thought of a way to handle the situation, and it had worked. They all smiled at him, and Light said he felt more at ease now that Yu-won was their class president. After the lecture ended, the same group of guys appeared again and called out to Light. He turned toward them and told them to come closer. Rachel quickly hid behind Yu-won. The guys asked if Light had not heard them, and Light stepped forward, standing in front of them and asking what they wanted this time. A group of guys stood in front of Light with swords drawn. Light looked at them calmly and asked what had brought them there this time. One of the guys demanded an explanation for what had happened yesterday, while another cursed the broadcast from the day before, saying their semester scores were ruined and that seniors had already marked them. Their classmates were avoiding them, and everyone around was watching. Yu-won noticed the professor nearby, but the three students showed no intention of stopping, as if the professor and the lower dimension students did not even see them as human. One of the guys grew angry, shouting at Light and demanding he repeat what he had said. Light calmly said he would repeat it, but if they wanted to hear, they should ask politely. Light then took out his sword. The guys shouted insults, calling him a barbarian. Suddenly, Light drew his shining sword, shocking everyone. He moved the sword to the guy's neck, forcing him to kneel, and said that it was nice that it had become quiet and that now, after receiving a proper greeting, he would take his leave. The guy could not move because of the overwhelming pressure. Yu-won watched in disbelief, wondering if this was even possible and what kind of concepts were bursting forth from Light. Dako observed quietly from a distance. Light then turned toward the professor and asked what kind of evaluation a group that attacked classmates with real swords during class would receive in the academy. The professor coughed and said that the academy encouraged practical sparring to some extent. Light replied that he had never accepted a sparring match. The professor agreed, but added that Light had pulled out a personal artifact. Light clarified that he was merely responding to an unprovoked attack. They began to argue, and Yu-won noticed that Light seemed a little different than usual. Light angrily asked the professor how he was supposed to handle the insults and slanders thrown at him. The professor laughed, which made Light lose control, and he swung his sword in anger, asking if the professor was serious. Suddenly, Dako tapped Light on the head with her finger and told him it was noisy, asking who he thought he was acting so high and mighty while being swung around by a sword. His energy disappeared instantly. The professor stood up angrily and called them arrogant, and Light had clearly been the biggest problem. Later, while eating at the table, Yu-won said he had been thinking that if things continued like this, they would not be treated well at the academy. Light replied that he thought he could try to improve the situation based on how Yu-won had handled things before. Yu-won reminded him that Light had almost caused a bigger problem, and Light felt sorry. Yu-won thought that if it were the usual Light, he would not have acted so recklessly, as if someone had flipped a switch. He asked Light whether he could control the power he had shown earlier. Light stood up and said he could, explaining that he had only lost his temper because of the professor's lies. Yu-won said that if it was because of lies, he would believe Light could control his power, and Light promised that nothing like that would happen again. Daco added that it was a relief to hear that, since watching him being swung around by that divine object had been quite a sight. She scolded him briefly and moved on. Then she told Yu-won that she was beginning to understand the advice the professor had given a few days ago. She said that if things continued this way, school life would only become noisier, and asked Yu-won, as the class representative, what he was thinking about their future. Daco told Yu-won that as the leader she wanted to hear his thoughts now. Yu-won fell silent and gathered his thoughts. Over the past few days, he had noticed what had been bothering them. There was a mindset of superiority based on birth or natural strength, a strange contempt toward those from lower dimensions, and an outdated system that accepted all of this as normal. In a place like this, outsiders such as them had little chance. Yu-won asked the group what they thought was necessary to build emotional rapport or gain favor from a wide audience. They said conversation and power, but Yu-won shook his head. They already had power. He explained that it was their appearance that mattered. They would create a channel showing their daily lives to build a public image and shape how people saw them. Rachel held up a sphere of white light for filming, and Yu-won explained that when people became familiar with an image, it could turn into respect and eventually reverence. Light asked why sparring was necessary if respect and admiration were the goal. Yu-won told them to take it seriously, as it would be a real sparring match, not staged. Light and Daco prepared themselves, and when it began, Daco grabbed Light by the collar and slammed him to the ground to make him take it seriously. Yu-won filmed everything. Daco scolded Light, asking if that was all he had, and told him that even if he brought out his sword like before, he still would not close the gap. Light grew angry and stood up again, and Yu-won continued filming, saying they were doing great. Rachel quietly asked Yu-won if he truly thought this would make school life easier. He replied that it would, because everyone already knew how skilled they were and others would think twice before messing with them. Daco and Light continued their fierce exchange. Yu-won told Rachel not to worry about the result, saying that her beauty was too precious to stress over things like this. He gently placed a finger near her face, forming a smiling shape, and thought that a beautiful face looked even better when smiling. Rachel blushed and smiled, feeling it was strange that whenever Yu-won said something, it seemed like it would really happen. Meanwhile, Light began to tire while fighting Daco. Later, Yu-won filmed Rachel eating noodle soup filled with cilantro, and she complained that she could not eat it because it tasted like soap. Following Yu-won's suggestion, the students of Class 11 began uploading videos of their daily lives to the channel, and the response was explosive. People flooded in to watch, and likes and comments poured endlessly. In just one day, the channel gained over 1,000 subscribers, and the students gathered together, excitedly reading the comments. Professor Yamina arrived and praised them, saying it was amazing. She explained that Union was a top dimension filled with wonders, but no student had ever thought to create media content like this. She laughed and said their channel cleverly turned everyday wonder into entertainment and connection, something she herself would never have thought of. On the day they entered the tower, everyone was dressed for battle, except Yu-won, who remained in his school uniform. When asked if he was really fine with that outfit, he recalled that his home had been peaceful with no special clothing for combat. He adjusted his tie, thought that this was the life he had chosen, and said his clothes were enough. Yamina nodded, saying everyone seemed ready, and with a wave of her finger, they were transported to the tower entrance. Others stared at them in surprise, as entry had been ordered by grade level, and they stood in the second-year line. Light noticed that people were looking at them differently now, as many had already seen their videos. Daco glanced toward Ektro and noted that some were still glaring with murderous intent. Yu-won acknowledged it and thought it was fine, knowing that today was the day they would climb the tower. The duel with Ektro was only 4 days away, and Yu-won planned to reach a level Ektro would never be able to touch. For safety, Yamina said she hoped they would finish the exploration early and return before the weekend, but the decision would belong to those climbing the tower. She asked how long they thought it would take. Yu-won answered confidently that it would take 3 days and 2 nights, and they would return on time. As he released his aura, he quietly told them to be careful and to wait and see. Professor Yamina raised an eyebrow when Yu-won mentioned filming inside the tower. He explained that he was trying to record the stations within it, using a small artifact he had created like a reboot device to capture data, since the tower's structure changed constantly. Light agreed, noting that the tower's internal layout shifted all the time. Yamina confirmed this and explained that each floor was called a room, and when the monsters were defeated or traps cleared, the space itself moved the party to the next room. This phenomenon, called a shift, measured how deeply someone had penetrated the tower. Questions followed, and Daco asked what would happen if someone died while climbing the tower. The room went silent as everyone considered the possibility. Yamina laughed softly and explained that in most areas, death did not mean permanent death. Those defeated would be sent back to the tower entrance, and their student ID cards recorded their progress, allowing them to resume from where they left off. Yu-won laughed, comparing it to a roguelike game with a mid-save function, and Light grinned, noting that guaranteed revival allowed for repeated challenges. Dako, however, questioned the exception, asking if there were areas where challengers could truly die. Yamaina confirmed that in certain exceptional situations, permanent death was possible. Not long after, they encountered monsters that destroyed an explorer's equipment, leaving them defenseless. Light fought with his sword, Dako used her power, and Yuwon faced a lap of fire. Although he could sense the concept of fire, he could not extract it. In other dimensions, this had never been a problem, so the tower's rejection of his ability stood out. Understanding this difference might be the key to unlocking his true potential. Dako called out to Yuwon, who responded a moment late because he had been lost in thought. She asked if he had discovered anything, and he said he had tried to extract the flame but it did not work. Dako said that was unfortunate because if it had worked, they could have used the tower's terrain at will. He replied dryly, telling her not to make scary predictions about his ability in advance. Suddenly, a monster lunged from behind Dako, and Yuwon activated his artifact, cutting it down before it could strike. Dako observed how fast the self-operating artifact worked, and he explained that there were stronger ones, but they tended to be noisy. Meanwhile, Rachel and Light were fighting loudly, which made Dako frown because the basics of battle involved concealment and avoiding detection. Yuwon laughed, noting that Rachel's fighting style was completely instinctive. Once the last monster fell, Light wiped his blade and said that Room 1 only had claw scythers, so they would not face much trouble. Dako warned him not to let his guard down, and at that moment, energy began to gather, signaling the arrival of a powerful foe. Light guessed it might already be an elite monster, and Dako agreed. Yuwon said he was already looking for it and called out to Rachel. Without hesitation, she charged forward and smashed the obelisk ahead in a single strike, destroying it before the elite monster could fully materialize. Silence followed as everyone stared in disbelief at how quickly she had destroyed it and picked up the enhancement core it dropped. Yuwon noticed her hair and widened his eyes, but she calmly turned her face away. Yuwon stared at Rachel in surprise because her hair had turned black. He realized it was connected to a concept called the Heart Furnace, a berserker-type ability that burned emotions as fuel to gain power. Remembering what he had seen earlier, everything fell into place. Rachel grabbed him by the waist and asked nervously if she had looked scary before. He reassured her that she had been reliable. She worried about losing control, and Dako, who had been watching silently, interrupted, saying it was fine and that she would kill her before she caused any damage. Rachel stiffened in fear, but Yuwon calmly reminded them that if anyone died, they would have to restart the exploration from Room 1. Dako added that if it continued, they might have to climb the tower with just the three of them and suggested it might even be better if it were just the two of them. Rachel looked disappointed, and Yuwon tapped her shoulder and promised he would think of a solution as class president. She thanked him sincerely, and he waved it off, feeling shy. Dako and Light watched silently as the exchange ended. The shift concluded, and they found themselves in Room 2. Light scanned the surroundings and noted little difference from the previous room except for moss and weeds. Yuwon held the elite monster core Rachel had given him and reflected on how much he had gained from just one room compared to grinding dungeons before. He dismantled the excess materials and fed them to Eve. Dako appeared behind Yuwon and remarked that he had grown stronger very quickly. Light turned sharply and warned that the monsters in Room 2 were about to appear inside, wishing they would act more seriously. Dako released a wave of pressure and noted that Room 2 was not much different from Room 1, comparing careless opponents to lions that would not die from an ant's bite. Evil spirit monsters then emerged, preying on the magic within humans. Light clenched his teeth, noting that people often get caught off guard when they least expect it. Dako suggested that Yuwon handle all the fighting in Room 2 to develop his abilities quickly, especially with the upcoming sparring match next week. Light and Rachel initially objected, but Dako insisted it was a good idea. Yuwon laughed and agreed to try handling things on his own for a while, reassuring Light and Rachel that it was fine so they would not get worn out. He asked Dako to back him up later if needed, and she promised he would not die from overexertion. Yuwon then activated Eve, transforming it into a weapon that fired a continuous stream of metal pellets, instantly tearing through the monsters. Light and Rachel watched in shock at the speed and unfamiliarity of the weapon, and Light thought how useful it would be for soldiers in their nation. Dako observed that while the attack was effective at long range and against weaker opponents, its linear pattern made it less reliable in a confined space. As Yuwon advanced, firing relentlessly, he failed to notice one evil spirit slipping into his blind spot, and both Light and Dako shouted a warning as it lunged at him from behind. They shouted to warn Yuwon, and he turned just in time to see an evil spirit rising behind him. He did not hesitate and shifted his grip as his sword flashed and cut cleanly through the monster, dispersing it at once. He smiled calmly and thought that they had almost scared him. The others stared in shock as Light wondered what kind of technique he had used and how he could handle a sword so well. Yuwon simply denied it and felt that it was nothing special, believing he was far less skilled than Light or Dako. He then rushed forward and cut down the remaining evil spirits with ease. When the last one fell, he planted his sword into the ground and realized that no more demon spirits were appearing, meaning this had to be the final wave. He called Eve over to finish the last lingering enemy. After that, he decided they should take a short break since the next shift would happen once this enemy was gone. Dako sat down and examined the remains of the death spirits, noticing how the sword marks were melting away. He understood that Yu-Won was already using abilities gained from the previous room. Although Yu-Won clearly lacked a life full of battles, his growth was unbelievably fast. Light acknowledged that controlling the shift like this proved how resourceful Yu-Won was, while Rachel felt it was the kind of thinking expected from an experienced student. Dako agreed and recognized that the final strike had been excellent. Yu-Won smiled happily and thanked them, feeling encouraged by their words. Dako mentioned that he relied too much on quick sword strikes, but even then, it was still better than swinging a sword without thinking. Light immediately protested and started arguing with Dako, refusing to be called foolish. During their exchange, Yu-Won reached into a portal, pulled out a can, and began drinking while laughing, amused that they were still arguing during a break when none of them looked tired. When the others noticed him drinking alone and asked what it was, he explained it casually. They complained that he could access the outside while they could not, so he told them to calm down and apologized for drinking alone. He lied that he had planned to share, then threw the can back into the portal and explained that its effect only worked when someone was exhausted. After the short rest, Dako decided that she would take charge in room 3 and felt that they had rested enough, so it was time to move forward. As the shift began, Yu-Won quietly closed his eyes and checked his internal code, realizing that his level had already reached the academy average. He understood that the sparring next Tuesday would depend on how much he could improve his martial arts, but the gap between his body and Erecto's strength was still huge and could not be closed by the weekend. Even so, learning martial arts from Dako had given him an important clue. He realized that gaining abilities mattered, but nurturing them was just as important, and even one more lesson from Dako could make a big difference. While looking at her, he noticed how much his thinking depended on her guidance, and he became so lost in thought that he failed to notice he was standing on the portal. Light shouted to warn him, and Yu-Won snapped out of it only to see that they were falling from the sky, with the ground completely gone beneath them. Rachel fell from the sky as the ground vanished beneath her, and Yu-Won saw her drop while instantly noticing the trap below, its surface filled with sharp weapons. Without hesitation, he moved and used Eve to save her, sending out a chain that left him hanging in midair while he held Rachel with his other hand. As he turned his head, he tried to understand what had just happened and realized it might have been a pin shift, since the room was wide and the trap had been placed exactly where they fell. Dako called out from behind, urging him to move quickly, and when he looked back and questioned how she had gotten there, she calmly warned him that staying still would mean death. Before he could react any further, arrows suddenly fired from the walls and rushed toward him. He could not release Rachel because she would fall straight into the trap, yet dodging would also break his grip. Deciding in an instant, he pulled Rachel fully into his arms and summoned his bike beneath them, protecting them both as they moved forward. Rachel held onto him tightly, trusting his words. Across the room, Light defended himself from flying axes with his sword, and as the pressure increased, golden wings spread from his back and carried him into the air. While flying, Light tried to make sense of the situation, remembering that traps were supposed to appear only after room 20, yet this was only room 3 and the danger was already extreme. He noticed Yu-Won and wondered what he had brought out this time. As traps continued to erupt from every direction, Yu-Won kept protecting both himself and Rachel, and in that moment, he suddenly felt his face grow warm. An arrow struck the side of the bike, but Yu-Won pushed forward and escaped the trap zone. Once they were safe, he noticed Light staring at him in shock, his eyes fixed on the bike and the wings behind him. Light spoke with curiosity that had been building for a while and wondered what Yu-Won was riding and whether it was another item from his world. Yu-Won answered simply that it was a hover bike and then asked about Dako's location, only to learn that Light had not seen her for some time. Elsewhere, Dako moved through the room with calm focus, easily protecting herself from the traps using her power. Meanwhile, Yu-Won and Light considered how the trap would end, and Yu-Won explained that according to the manual, they only needed to endure it for a set amount of time. He told Light to run to the other side and said he would take care of releasing the trap. As Yu-Won observed more closely, he noticed a pattern in the attacks and realized that every trap was aimed at Light. This made him suspect that the trap reacted to movement, and he understood that they had not been meant to move carelessly from the beginning. Rachel then pointed out the arrow stuck in the bike, and Yu-Won pulled it out while thinking that he needed to warn everyone to stop moving unnecessarily. As he held the arrow, it suddenly heated up and vanished from his hand. He froze in shock, realizing that something had disappeared and wondering if it had been absorbed. His thoughts returned to room 1, where he had been unable to read anything, and he felt there had to be a reason behind it. Assuming it might be a coincidence, he reached down and picked up a sword lying on the ground, but the moment his hand closed around the hilt, the sword vanished as well. Yu-Won realized that the concept he had acquired was not the sword itself, but the act of beheading. With this understanding, he saw that appearances were misleading and that what showed on the surface was never the true meaning. The real essence existed in the instant when power took shape. Rachel suddenly called out and pointed forward, drawing his attention ahead. Light was close to losing consciousness after being hit by the trap. He had expected sharp weapons, but he never imagined water would pour out, mixed with something dangerous. His senses grew dull, his body felt numb, and his vision slowly blurred, making it impossible for him to respond to the next trap at this rate. Yuan noticed immediately and rushed toward him, leaving Rachel behind because bringing her into danger was not an option. He asked her to wait there for a moment, and she agreed while quietly wishing for him to stay strong. As he moved, Yuan confirmed his thoughts that what had struck Light was water, yet what he had acquired was not water but the wave itself. In that moment, the concept became clear to him. Dako arrived from a distance and silently observed the unfolding scene. As Yuan closed the distance to Light, his thoughts moved quickly, and he understood that the state of a substance at the moment it appeared decided the concept that could be acquired. Since the projectiles had been aimed at Light's neck, they carried the idea of beheading rather than the blades themselves. Another sharp weapon flew toward Light, but Yuan stepped past him and took control of the situation. As he pushed his power deeper, his perception sharpened until he could even read the intent carried within the attacks. Without hesitation, he stepped directly into the path of the trap, leaving Light staring in shock at what he was witnessing. Yuan raised his hand, knowing that absorbing everything was unnecessary. As long as the forces could be mixed together, and their forms broken down, it would be enough. The absorption took place, and every weapon vanished, erased completely. He confirmed that the situation was under control, and Rachel watched from behind with clear relief and happiness on her face. Yuan returned safely to the ground as Light ran toward him to check if he was all right. For a moment, the danger had passed, and Light hesitated before asking what had just happened. Yuan explained that everything that attacked them had felt as if it merged together, which made Light wonder if a new ability had awakened. Before they could speak further, another trap suddenly activated and surged toward them while they were still talking. Rachel and Dako rushed in at the same time and pulled them out of danger. Dako warned them sharply that speaking carelessly in a dangerous situation would eventually lead to serious trouble. Both of them were startled by her sudden appearance, and Yuan thanked Rachel and Dako for saving their lives. As things finally settled, Yuan quietly watched Light and Dako argue, with Light questioning why her words were always so harsh. A quiet laugh escaped Yuan, as that hardly seemed like the right question at such a moment. No matter what they said, when danger appeared they moved without hesitation to protect one another, and the team was working better than expected. Dako remarked that the timing had been right and hinted that the debt would be collected later. Yuan silently hoped that this growing sense of trust and camaraderie was real and not just an illusion. They entered room 4, and the first thing Yuan noticed was the ceiling, which was much lower than in the previous rooms. He felt relieved that there would be no ambush from above this time, but that thought ended instantly when he suddenly turned and struck. A massive spider lunged forward, and everyone immediately recognized it as a tower spider. Yuan recalled that Eve's attacks had already been tested on creatures like this, while Light calmly explained that tower spider abilities were random and that their natural weapons alone made them extremely dangerous. After quickly judging the situation, Light turned to Dako and understood that she would need to take action this time, and she responded with a quiet nod. As Yuan looked around, more spiders began to emerge, making him mutter in disbelief that such high-level monsters were appearing so early. Dako let out a light sigh and told everyone to stay behind her, then looked at Yuan and urged him to watch carefully because this was exactly what he had been searching for. She raised her hand, and a powerful surge of energy burst outward. It was a direct energy blast, and Yuan froze as he instantly recognized it, finding it even stranger than Eve's bullets. The blast ripped through the swarm and knocked out most of the spiders at once. Dako turned back casually and left the remaining enemies to him, laughing lightly as she showed unexpected ease and confidence. Yuan laughed along and quickly gave orders, having Light guard the rear and Rachel watch the ceiling. As he moved forward, he realized that Dako was not his ruler, yet he had never expected her to be this considerate. With that thought, he swung his sword at one of the remaining spiders. The blade stopped before cutting through, and Yuan realized the spider's body was far tougher than he had expected. Another spider jumped at him, and he stepped back before stabbing forward and killing it, yet the problem became clear. Slashing was ineffective, and relying only on stabbing would not work with so many enemies closing in. At that moment, he remembered something he had gained in the previous room and understood that this was the perfect time to use it. The power activated, and the sword transformed into the executioner's long sword. As the spiders rushed toward him, Yuan moved without hesitation, and with one powerful swing, the blade cut cleanly through their bodies. One after another, the spiders fell easily, leaving everyone watching in shock at the sudden change. Yuan briefly examined the blade and noticed that although the cut was clean, something felt off. He adjusted his stance and struck again, and this time the movement felt right. Rachel and Light started to move in to help, but Dako remained still and watched in silence. She understood what had happened and realized that the transformation was something Yuan had done on his own. He had changed his weapon so it could cut enemies he had not been able to damage before, an act that required deep intuition and precise control. As she watched him fight, she saw that he was refining his skill instead of relying only on raw power, unlike Light and Rachel, who often depended on their weapons and abilities when under pressure. Yuwon showed no such weakness, and Dako believed that even if not now, he would one day reach the true essence of the chop by himself. There was no reason for her to interrupt that path, yet leaving him alone felt like a waste. She had once overcome the 3 calamities and taken pride in being the greatest prodigy of the martial world, but seeing Yuwon's talent now made her own past achievements feel small. As she continued to observe him, a single thought settled firmly in her mind, and she decided that she had to make him hers. This situation could not continue as it was. Dako followed closely behind Yuwon, her eyes fixed on his back, and the thought of making him hers kept repeating in her mind. Yuwon suddenly stopped and turned his head slightly, feeling an uneasy chill run down his spine. Light noticed and asked what was wrong, and Yuwon explained the strange feeling before questioning Dako about why she was standing around instead of helping. Tension began to rise between them, but before it could turn into an argument, an external message interrupted the moment. Light read the message aloud and learned that all students were ordered to evacuate the tower immediately. The command had come directly from the headmaster. Rachel, standing to the side, began breathing heavily, sensing something was wrong. Dako frowned and complained that she had not even warmed up yet and had not had a single sweet drink, and she firmly refused to accept such an ending. At that moment, Rachel suddenly sensed danger and warned the others. They turned around and froze as an overwhelming number of spiders poured into the room. Light realized this had to be what was discussed in the meeting, and Yuwon agreed, feeling that the difficulty had been strange from the beginning. Dako quickly checked her student ID, only to find that it was no longer working. From this, Yuwon understood that they were trapped inside the room. Light stared at the advancing swarm and recognized it as the phenomenon the professor had mentioned earlier, a spatial irregularity where even students could die. The spiders continued to flood in without end. Professor Yamina had warned them that during freshman climbs, there was a high chance of dimensional pirates invading, and when such abnormal invasions occurred, they caused unpredictable and irregular effects. Under normal conditions, students would not die during tower visits, but once an irregularity appeared, all rules changed. Safe areas turned dangerous, monster numbers increased uncontrollably, and room difficulty rose without warning. The tower no longer guaranteed safety, and being caught in such a phenomenon meant they were now facing an extremely dangerous situation. Now they were living proof of the danger. They fought desperately as Yuwon and Rachel mounted the bike to escape pressure from one side. Light pointed out that there was no way to know how long the spiders would keep appearing and that trying to endure like this was too risky. Dako looked at the endless swarm and remarked that it truly seemed limitless, yet they continued fighting without pause. Light urged Dako not to stop, and she snapped back that he should focus on himself instead. Yuwon carefully observed the battlefield and saw that Dako had already defeated dozens of spiders while Light was clearly exhausted. Rachel's hair had turned more than halfway black, and she barely spoke anymore, which worried him deeply. If her hair fully changed, the situation would become a nightmare. Yuwon called out to Dako, and she weakly raised her hand and admitted that she could not continue much longer. Without rest, things would soon become extremely dangerous. Yuwon handed her a sweet drink and told her to recover while he held the line. Dako rested and drank, smiling faintly as she wondered if he could truly manage on his own. In response, Yuwon pulled out a bomb, showing his confidence without words. He threw it into the swarm, and a massive explosion tore through the spiders. Light stared in shock at the sight, and Yuwon calmly explained that he had put a great deal of effort into making it. He then mounted his bike and told Light to rest as well. Rachel still seemed to have plenty of energy, but she was far too unstable to depend on right now. With monsters still pouring in and no idea how long they would be trapped, letting Light and Dako recover was the safest choice. If Yuwon could defeat as many enemies as possible and buy them even a little time, it might be enough. In the middle of the fight, he suddenly noticed something strange as the blade of his sword slowly began turning red. Yuwon watched as his sword slowly turned red and swung it experimentally, his mind racing to understand its power. He wondered what the blood poison ability was based on, but there was no time to analyze deeply, so he decided to test it in battle. He advanced through the spiders, cutting them down as he went, and noticed that the sword's trajectory extended unnaturally. The chop concept strengthened the slash itself, increasing its cutting power, while the blood poison drew on his own blood to extend the range and distance of each attack. It was effective but costly, and every swing felt like donating his own blood, making it clear he could not use it often. When the last spider fell, Light stared at him, noticing the crimson aura around the blade and questioning what the sword was doing. Yuwon turned and asked about Rachel, and Light explained that she was over there fighting fiercely, and that they should not approach her yet. Yuwon agreed, noting that neither of them should jump in right now since more rest was needed. Light scoffed that he had rested enough, then paused and frowned, realizing that the swarm of spiders had noticeably decreased. Yuwon looked around and saw that Light was right, and Dako quietly confirmed that the flow of monsters had stopped. Light's expression hardened, knowing that when a monster wave halts, it usually meant either the battle was over or something stronger was about to appear. At that moment, Rachel's movements became more violent as her hair turned completely dark. A massive spider emerged, and Yuan froze, realizing that creatures that size were supposed to appear only after room 50. Light shouted and grabbed his shoulder, warning him that there was more than one. Yuan turned and saw 2 elite spiders, one in front and one behind, and shock flooded his face. Light muttered bitterly that nothing in the Academy's manuals seemed to match reality. Meanwhile, Dako calmly took another drink, silently enjoying herself, while Rachel continued fighting alone. Yuan called out to her, and then told Light to stay close to Rachel. Yuan decided to take 1 spider each with Light, planning to handle the one in the rear with Dako. Light agreed, and they split off in different directions. Yuan gripped his sword tightly, feeling confident in his words but uncertain in his thoughts. He realized that even with both chop and blood poison, cutting through monsters of this level was difficult. Dako approached and stopped beside him, pointing out that he had claimed he could handle it alone even though he knew he might not win and had not asked for her help. She handed him a drink with an unusual flavor and asked if he enjoyed the sweetness. Then she produced a sword with a movement of her hand and told him that from now on he would pay the price for that sweetness. It might seem excessive, but it was not meant as a debt. Yuan was surprised that she had chosen to draw a sword even though she could fight bare-handed and wondered if there was a reason for it. Dako explained that she simply did not want to dirty her hands and that he should not read too much into it. She stepped forward calmly, thinking that what he lacked was just one move. She would only show it once, and only to him. 1 single slash would be enough for him to understand. Standing before the elite spider, she told him to watch carefully. Yuan's attention shifted briefly as he saw Light restraining Rachel, who had lost control. Suddenly, a spider behind them fired a web, and Rachel leapt away while Light was caught, throwing everything into chaos. Dako called out sharply, asking what he was focusing on, and Yuan explained that he had been watching but had been caught off guard by the attack behind them. She moved with precision and, in a single motion, cut the elite spider cleanly in 2. She told him that it was fine now and that only the remaining enemies outside still posed a threat. Yuan watched in awe as Dako made a simple upward slash from below. It seemed like just a swing, yet within that single movement, he saw death itself, a force that divided the world. He clutched his head, unable to find words, as merely glimpsing a fragment of her skill caused the Babylonian code inside him to surge violently. The power he had seen felt similar to the moment Orima's force field had been shattered. He realized this had to be an enhanced version of the technique that once cut through the concept of death itself, and he wondered how a person could infuse such will into a sword. Dako called him closer and told him she would not show the move a second time. She handed him the core of the elite spider she had just defeated. Yuan hesitated, feeling that it was her kill and wondering if he should really take it. Dako smiled and said it was his reward and that he should not hesitate to accept it. From a distance, Light shouted for them to stop flirting and come help immediately, warning that Rachel was about to go berserk. Light looked completely helpless, and Yuan realized that Dako was the only one who could stop Rachel. She calmly told him not to look at her and that she had already done her part in the battle. Yuan tried to convince her that if the situation worsened and someone died, it would be too late. After a pause, Dako agreed and told Yuan to handle entertaining the beast, warning him that in exchange, he would have to finish off whatever was lurking beneath. Dako moved her hand and called Rachel down toward her, saying that she would have some real fun with her. Rachel jumped down, and Dako taunted her, grabbing her hand briefly before letting go. She calmly told her not to go there, but over here, and instructed Rachel to charge blindly at the strong monster, flipping its senses and confusing it. Rachel growled in rage as Dako ordered her to get up and warned that there was no time for explanations. Yuan watched carefully, nodded in understanding, and raised his sword. He stood before the remaining monster, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind, wondering if the task was too much. Before he could think further, the spider lunged at him, and he stepped back quickly. Light shouted to check if he was okay, and Yuan explained that the monster had attacked as soon as they had retreated. Though it was near death, it still seemed confident it could take him down. Yuan calmly said that it was fine and called Eve to action. At his command, Eve moved to bind the monster, and Light stared in disbelief, unsure if the spider could really be restrained. Dako turned to watch. Yuan carefully used Eve to bind the spider's legs as much as possible, then layered Chop with blood poison to strike from within its reach. Light and the others watched in shock, questioning what he was doing. Yuan steadied himself, readying his next move, but the slash came up too short and the blood poison failed to activate properly. Using 2 abilities consecutively like that had almost never worked before, making the attack partially ineffective. Using 2 abilities in a row was something Yuan had almost never done before. The moment he forced his power out again, his grip failed, and the sword slipped from his hand, clattering onto the ground. He staggered, gasping for breath, one hand clutching his shoulder. In that instant, he realized that if he faced the incoming attack head-on, the moment the blade hit, both his sword and his arm would shatter. He quickly adjusted the angle and seized the sword just in time. For a brief moment, no more than a split second, it felt as if time had stretched into eternity, reminding him of Dako's swordsmanship from before. He straightened, holding the blade firmly, and understood that her single strike had awakened a hidden aspect of his martial arts that he had not even known existed. Even if he could not copy her exact swordsmanship, he now knew what needed to be done. He faced the monster, sword held forward, ready for the next move. Watching him, Light narrowed his eyes, thinking about parrying, a technique to deflect or redirect an enemy's attack to avoid a fatal blow and possibly create an opening for a counterattack. But he knew that was only a tactical concept, and reality was different. In actual combat, most people died before ever learning such techniques or survived only by relying on entirely different methods. Yet here Yuan was, standing ready against the monster. Light was stunned, unable to believe that Yuan could display such skill in a situation like this, especially since he had said he had never wielded a sword before. From the front, he parried attacks, and from the side, he redirected them. Bit by bit, his movements began to take shape. Rachel rushed forward again, but Dako grabbed her and pulled her back, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. As she watched, Dako realized that Yuan had gained something from witnessing her first strike, but what he was showing now exceeded even her expectations. There was a martial art in the central planes that focused on the essence of flow, but very few dared to learn it. Deflecting an opponent's force required capturing a fleeting moment that appeared only once in 100,000 instances. It was extremely dangerous and demanded immense effort, which is why most abandoned it for easier techniques. Yet here, she was seeing it in action. For someone like Dako, who had pursued only overwhelming and dominating martial arts until now, this offered a completely new perspective. She had never imagined that mastering a skill she once dismissed as trivial could appear so impressive. She quietly thanked Rachel for pointing out the narrowness of her own thinking. Dako knew, however, that deflection alone would not be enough to win. To truly succeed, Yuan had to see beyond the attack. If he had truly grasped the flow and could deflect an opponent's force, he should also be able to return that same force as an attack. He moved, borrowing the penetrating strength of the enemy and spinning to combine two abilities into a single motion. The blade carved cleanly through the monster. Light stared in disbelief, and Dako smiled, genuinely pleased, thinking that he had done well. The monster collapsed, lifeless, and Dako repeated her praise. Only then did Yuan fully realize how to create a stronger concept, and his internal code shifted violently, undergoing a profound change. Dako called out that it was over and that he had handled even a beast like that. She muttered that she wished she had been the one tied up like an idiot. At that moment, an idea struck Yuan. He absorbed the concept of the spiderweb that had bound Light earlier, and realized that if he fed it to Eve, he could convert it into a chain net. He activated it, saying calmly that it would not matter if Rachel resisted. The chains wrapped tightly around her, draining her magic, and the more she struggled, the tighter they constricted. Light turned red with embarrassment, and quickly covered his eyes, saying he should not be looking. When the shift ended, the chains proved effective, and Yuan checked his student ID, which was active again. He said that they should leave now, and Dako agreed. Before they could move, a voice echoed through the space, causing them to freeze. A shadow emerged, offering them the opportunity to form a contract with the observer of 10,000 eyes. Professor Yarmina was waiting for them at the same entrance they had first used. She rushed forward, her face full of worry, asking if everyone was okay and whether there were any injuries or after effects. Yuan laughed lightly and told her to calm down, reassuring her that everyone was fine. She exhaled in relief, explaining that even though the evacuation notice had been issued, she had been terrified because no one had come out. She was glad they were safe but needed to know what had happened inside. They moved to another room to talk, and Yuan asked what had gone wrong. They had been caught in an irregular phenomenon after the room 4 shift, which had occurred not long after they entered. He asked Yarmina what had happened inside the tower while they were trapped. Her expression darkened as she explained that a student had been killed by an external intruder. Shock spread through the room. She said the academy was handling the situation, but the students who had been in the same party were struggling deeply. The attack had been carried out by Dimension Pirates, external invaders who targeted new students. If a student died and their student ID was taken, they could not be resurrected and would be trapped in the tower forever. He asked what had happened to the invader, and Yarmina said they had escaped because the students on site could not stop them. Dako spoke coldly, seeing it as a planned test. She noted that countless invaders tried to climb the Tower of Babel, and when new students entered, it was the perfect opportunity to kill prestigious freshmen, damage the academy's reputation, gain climbing qualifications, and take the student ID as proof. From the academy's perspective, she explained, the responsibility would be shifted onto the students, claiming that enduring such intruders was just another trial for freshmen. Yarmina tried to interrupt, but Dako continued, sharply criticizing the academy for letting invaders break in and students die while claiming to be the best academy in the multi-dimensions. Silence followed. Yamina finally said Dako was misunderstanding. She explained that protecting students was the academy's duty, but once they entered the tower, responsibilities shifted. If the tower itself chose an invader over a student, the academy could not interfere because it was the will of the tower. Dako laughed bitterly, raised her student ID, and said she disliked the situation even more. Yamina tried to stop her, but she left. He turned to the professor and explained that she should understand that something unpleasant had happened inside the tower. Yamina asked what had occurred, and he hesitated before saying that before they returned, they had encountered something. The others lowered their heads, and when Yamina asked what it was, he replied quietly that it had been a constellation. Constellations were transcendental patrons who watched over countless dimensions. When they discovered someone worthy of interest, a contract was formed through that individual. As beings beyond normal limits, constellations had overwhelming influence within a world. In exchange for devotion, they granted powerful magic, unique abilities, rare artifacts, and many other rewards. Their demands were harsh and often cruel, but refusal was rare. In a world where power determined value, no offer was more tempting, yet constellations were undeniably dangerous partners. Professor Yamina asked what had happened inside the tower. Banyu-1 explained that the observer of all sight had spoken in a strange, unsettling voice, promising power in exchange for fulfilling its demands. Yamina showed visible excitement, realizing that contact with a constellation had occurred on the very first day inside the tower, something unprecedented in the Academy's history. Establishing contact so early meant that exceptional talent had already been recognized. Yu-1 then asked about the Academy's stance on forming contracts with constellations. Officially, Yamina said the Academy remained neutral, but unofficially students were encouraged to seize such opportunities. Yu-1 found the response bitter, noting that the Academy had no reliable defense against intruders yet showed goodwill toward beings about whom so little was known. Yamina asked what the observer of all sight had demanded, and Yu-1 answered without hesitation that it required murder. Shock spread across her face as he explained that the constellation had offered contracts to two individuals on the condition that one killed the other first. Only blood-filled veins were worthy, and songs and praise were to be offered. If the neck of a companion was severed and presented, the observer promised to remain close until the summit of the tower, granting everything desired. The demand was revolting, requiring the death of a companion in exchange for power. Yu-1 turned to Dako, whose eyes had changed as sharp, uncontrolled energy surged outward. She said coldly to leave it. Yamina quickly explained that Dako had likely released her energy unconsciously. Yu-1 said that being subjected to such a test was disgusting. The professor sighed and told everyone to rest for the remainder of the week since a duel against Electro was scheduled for Tuesday, giving them time to prepare. Yu-1 submitted a detailed report on the tower along with recorded data from the incident. Yamina accepted it and suggested sharing a meal together but paused, realizing that such a gathering was unlikely. Everyone was exhausted both physically and mentally, and she nodded in understanding. Before leaving, Yu-1 spoke to Light and Rachel, praising their performance and thanking them for their effort. He assured them that such an incident would not happen again and hoped that no resentment toward the Academy remained. Light said it was time to depart. As they turned to leave, Yamina called out a final question, asking whether the observer of all sight had offered contracts only to two among the four, specifically Banyu-1 and Dako. Yu-1 confirmed that it had. In retrospect, the observer had not just tried to turn companions against each other. It had separated the worthy from the useless, dismissing Light and Rachel as burdens and commanding their deaths while promising that Banyu-1 and Dako would rise above all climbers if they carried out the act. The constellation had demanded killing and seizing as the true nature of the world. Banyu-1 and Light returned to their room. Light collapsed onto the sofa, covering his face, without even washing up. Yu-1 noted that even Rachel would not sit so comfortably and wondered if such a posture was uncomfortable. Silence followed, then Light asked if mockery was intended. Yu-1 denied it. Light lowered his head, shoulders heavy, and apologized, saying that emotions needed an outlet. Yu-1 calmly told him that no insult had been intended. Light let out a hollow laugh, muttering that even insult held no value here. The reaction was unexpected, and something was clearly wrong. Finally, with clenched fists and a strained voice, Light admitted the truth. He felt hatred directed toward Banyu-1. Light spoke with open hatred and frustration, saying he almost hated Yu-1. Yu-1 imagined replying the same but held himself back, choosing patience instead. He sat on the sofa and calmly told Light to speak freely, even if it was only a complaint, and promised to listen. Light answered with disappointment, and explained that in his old world he had been seen as a great talent. Yu-1 silently agreed that it was probably true. Light continued, saying his family and everyone around him had admired him and placed their hopes on him, trusting him with the holy sword and expecting him to gain power from Babel's tower and become their final guardian. Light then confessed that because of their faith, he had formed a contract with the sacred sword and entered the academy carrying huge expectations, yet now he felt useless and treated like a burden. Yu-1 tried to comfort him, saying he did not need to take the words of divine beings so seriously. Light responded bitterly, saying Yu-won could speak lightly because he had been chosen, while he himself was nothing more than a bystander. He said the chosen ones were divine and far beyond humans, and he could not understand how Yu-won and Dako-yun had been able to reject such overwhelming offers so easily. Yu-won said the proposal was clearly nonsense, and that there were many ways to grow strong without anyone needing to die. He said neither of them had come there to listen to such cruel demands. Light replied that Yu-won could think that way only because he had overwhelming talent. He admitted that if sacrificing others had been the condition to be chosen by a divine being, he might have hesitated and possibly accepted it. Yu-won called his name, but Light continued, saying he would not have been able to reject it as firmly as Yu-won or Dako-yun. He confessed that this thought filled him with resentment and fear, and that he could not forgive himself for it. Later, after taking a bath, Yu-won returned to the room and found Light lying on the bed. Light apologized softly, saying he was sorry for whining and admitted it was not Yu-won's fault. He said he had only acted out of jealousy, and had unloaded his uncomfortable feelings. Yu-won smiled and told him that friends could listen to such things anytime. He said he would step out for a while and suggested having hot chocolate, adding that sweet things made unpleasant feelings fade. Light thanked him. Yu-won left the room and thought that Light had changed a lot since they first met, and that he should be more careful with his words next time. As he stepped out, Dako appeared and casually said he was back, sounding relieved that she did not have to go inside. Yu-won shouted in shock and asked why she was there, reminding her it was the men's dormitory. Dako replied lightly that it was not a crime if no one caught her, which left Yu-won speechless. She grabbed him and pulled him away to another place. Later, they sat together on a bench, and Yu-won guessed that she had come there because the annex cafe was too crowded. She replied that she had simply wandered around and ended up there out of curiosity. She then asked about Light, calling him a burden and wondering if he was doing fine. Yu-won reacted sharply, questioning why she spoke of Light that way and rejecting the idea that he was useless. She answered coldly, saying Light relied only on swinging his strength and lacked true talent or adaptability. Yu-won argued back, insisting that Light was skilled in swordsmanship and had many abilities. She replied that all of those abilities came from the sword alone, saying that without it, Light was no different from a useless fool. She added that Light was insecure, poor at reading situations, and easily lost his composure at critical moments. She warned that if he lost his fighting spirit in a serious situation, there would be no reason to stay together anymore, especially when others were already growing weaker. Yu-won thought her words sounded like both an insult and concern, then asked about her instead. He said she had been acting strange since meeting the divine being and mentioned her irritation in front of the professor. She blushed and asked if he was worrying about her, wondering if he had noticed through some ability. Yu-won replied that he did not need any ability to see it on her face and gently offered her tea, saying he only wanted to know if she was alright. She held the cup and realized he was comforting her, admitting it felt sweeter than she expected. Yu-won looked confused by her reaction. She then thanked him for worrying and said it was not that serious, explaining she had only been irritated at the time. When Yu-won asked what had caused it, she revealed that as the observer of countless worlds, she had spoken with that being and wondered if they had been thinking the same thing. Yu-won's eyes widened in shock at her words. Dako said that in the end it was all the same, and that if those two had been useless, she had even thought about discarding them. Ben reacted in shock and asked what kind of nonsense she was saying. She admitted that this was exactly why she had been so frustrated, explaining that if she had been more radical and focused only on capable people, she might have let the others die through neglect, even if she did not kill them directly. She said she was angry at herself for almost agreeing with such a method. Ban calmly acknowledged her feelings. She repeated her question, and Ban smiled and called her a fool as well. She felt stunned that after revealing her deepest thoughts, this was his response, and she asked if he truly believed those two had talent. Ben answered confidently that no matter how powerful an artifact was, they could not have come so far without talent. He said Light clearly had natural talent with the sword but relied too much on the holy sword and failed to keep up with situations. He added that Luzul had absurd physical ability and great potential, but her inner struggles held her back. He admitted it would not be easy, yet believed that if they could overcome their flaws on their own, their talent would one day surpass anything either of them could imagine. Dako said she would trust him and agreed that if they trained, the results would eventually prove themselves. Ben then asked if she was willing to help now. She replied that if those two truly overcame their struggles and grew as he said, she would admit he was right. However, she warned that if the results did not satisfy her, then he would have to take responsibility. Ben reacted in shock at her words, but she walked away and told him to think carefully about taking responsibility for making her set aside her own judgment and spend time on those fools. Ben tried to stop her, but she jumped down and casually said she would see him tomorrow morning, telling him to gather the other two as well. Ben shouted her name in disbelief and questioned why she was already talking about tomorrow when she had just returned. The scene then shifted to the training hall, where Light was sparring with Dako. Light was knocked down and trembled as he cried out for Ban. Yu-won immediately answered that he was there. Light broke down, saying he had followed Yu-won because he promised to teach him something, yet he was the only one taking all the hits. Dako stepped forward and coldly scolded him, saying this was physical training and that such a method was necessary. She said Light was not someone who could change just by watching once like you, and ordered him to stop whining and get up. Light desperately asked for his sword, but Dako refused and said he would not get it back until he learned how to fight without it. Light protested that he was a swordsman, and she sharply asked if that meant he would die the moment he lost his sword. Light answered that he would simply never lose it. She challenged him to try grabbing it and fighting her. Light hesitated, admitting he could not fight properly without his sword. Yu-won stepped in and calmly told Light that this training was meant for his growth, and that it was something he and Dako had agreed on together. He asked Light to trust them just once and try training without relying on his sword. Light agreed to try and decided to trust Ban, believing there was meaning behind this training. He accepted the challenge with determination, but before he could properly begin, Dako suddenly kicked him. She criticized his wide openings, broken stance, and slow reactions, striking him again while telling him not to rely only on his eyes but to feel attacks with his senses. Light shouted that he understood, yet Dako coldly told him to fix it immediately, and questioned whether his combat instincts were truly this dull without his sword. Yu-won observed silently, and realized something was wrong. He noticed that Light's abilities were dropping unnaturally in real time. Normally, Light was strong enough to handle powerful opponents with ease, yet the moment he stopped relying on the sword, his strength seemed to drain away. Yu-won sensed that if this change was truly caused by the sword, then Light's condition was far worse than he had expected. Dako pressed Light further, saying he was growing weaker by the moment, and mocking him by asking if his true self was the sword itself. Light shouted that it was not true. Dako harshly replied that he was completely useless without his sword. Light screamed in denial, and Dako challenged him to stop searching for a sword that was not even in his hands and to face her properly. As she threw a final powerful punch, a sudden burst of golden light erupted around Light, and he instinctively struck back. Dako narrowly dodged the blow, while Rachel and Yu-won stared in shock at the glowing, transformed light before them. Ben wondered if Light had stopped holding back or if something deeply suppressed inside him had finally broken free. Dako reacted in shock when she realized it was Light, but the golden mana quickly faded and Light dropped to his knees. Dako told Ben that Light was fine, yet this was not a problem that could be solved easily. Light soon returned to his normal form, and Dako asked if he understood what the real issue was. Light nodded and admitted that Ben and Dako were right, saying he could not continue like this and asked her to spar with him again. Dako said she needed to apologize first and admitted she had misjudged him. Light replied that there was no need for an apology since he was the one being helped. Dako bluntly said she had thought he was just a clueless fool, but now realized he was a fool carrying a dangerous bomb inside him, hoping it would not explode inside the tower. Light shouted that he really disliked her. Rachel then spoke up, saying that she and Ban should train as well. Ban was stunned as he thought about what he had just seen. He wondered whether the power inside Light was holy or demonic, and how such opposite forces could exist in one body. He believed this conflict was the cause of the outburst, and decided to talk to Light later in the dorm. He apologized to Rachel for not responding earlier, saying he had been lost in thought. Rachel said it was fine and expressed her wish to spar too. Ben asked if that would really be okay, and Rachel honestly replied that it would not be fine, but Ben had a way to restrain her. Ben answered with concern, still unsure about the situation. Rachel said she also wanted to control her power and wished to be useful. Ben agreed and noticed that she seemed unusually motivated, wondering if the recent events had shaken her deeply. He handed her a wooden sword and suggested they train at their own pace, slowly increasing intensity instead of being reckless. Rachel accepted seriously, and Ben asked to begin. She promised to do her best. As they prepared, Ben reflected that this was the kind of college life he had dreamed of, not chaotic fighting but young people encouraging each other and growing together. He felt grateful that this moment was becoming real because of Rachel. When she asked if she should start, Ben told her to attack anytime. Her expression instantly turned fierce. A few minutes later, chaos followed. Rachel lost control and was restrained by chains as Ben shouted for her to hold on. When she regained her senses, she worried about Ben and asked if he was hurt. Exhausted, Ben joked that his arms and legs were still attached. Rachel apologized, blaming herself, but Ben gently comforted her and said he had promised to help and was prepared for this. Dako stepped in and teased Ben for sweet-talking the beast instead of training seriously. Ben protested, saying he had almost died. Dako mocked him further, while Rachel defended Ben and said he truly cared about her. Dako warned that wandering thoughts during training were disrespectful and told Rachel to focus. Ben noticed Rachel becoming shy again despite her motivation and admired her effort to keep going even without time to recover mentally. He then revealed that he had received permission from the professor to bring one person along when leaving the floating island. Dako reacted happily, saying she had felt trapped there. Ben then turned to Rachel and told her she would come with him outside. Everyone was shocked when Ben smiled and invited her directly, asking her to go on a date with him. Ben Yu-won reminded Dako over the call that it was not an overnight stay and that he would return before evening. Dako replied casually that after living in another world for so long, He should know that men and women would not stay out late without reason. Light complained that Ban was going out with someone else before his own roommate, and Ban teased him back by asking if he was acting like a mother. Rachel soon arrived, neatly dressed in the clothes Ban had recommended. She shyly asked if they looked alright and admitted they felt a bit revealing. Ban praised her honestly, saying she looked truly beautiful. Later, under the bright day outside the academy, Rachel was amazed by the huge city and said she could not believe such a place existed beyond the academy walls. Ben smiled and said even he had only visited a suburban city a few times, then suggested they walk more toward another department store and shopping area. Rachel happily agreed. As they walked through the busy streets, Rachel noticed the crowd growing thicker and worried she might lose Ban. He suddenly took her hand and gently asked if she was okay, apologizing for forgetting it was her first time in such a crowded place. She said she was fine, and Ban suggested they keep holding hands to avoid getting separated. Rachel agreed, blushing softly. They spent time enjoying different places together, winning stuffed toys and shopping while laughing and running through the crowds. Later, while resting in a restaurant, Ben asked if she was really okay eating there, explaining that the ingredients were made from monster meat. Rachel replied that was exactly why she liked it, and after tasting the food, she said it was delicious. Ben agreed, surprised that it tasted even better than he had expected. Rachel felt amazed as she ate alone meat in the city, and could hardly believe this was happening, knowing it was all thanks to Ben. She kept looking at him, and Ben asked if something was wrong or if she did not like the food. Rachel explained that it was not that at all, but that she felt overly excited and unsure. She said Ben had brought her to the city for the first time in a long while, bought her several nice outfits, and treated her to such a delicious meal, yet she felt she had done nothing for him in return. She wondered if it was really okay to enjoy herself so much and admitted she was uncertain whether this outing would truly help her control her abilities. Ben asked her to look at his hand and said that the emotions she was feeling were taking shape above it. When she said she could not see anything, he smiled and told her to assume it was there. He explained that before, he could only sense anger from her, but now he could feel many subtle emotions just from spending this short time together. He said that if they grew closer and understood each other better, they would surely find a solution to her problems. Rachel asked if he could see the worries she was feeling right now. Ben answered that he could, then suddenly clapped his hands and cheerfully said they were gone. He promised again that he would solve her problems and asked her to enjoy the day without thinking about repaying anything. Rachel nodded and felt that everything Ben said felt like magic that always came true. Ben then added that coming on this strong might feel overwhelming. Rachel quickly denied it and said it was not overwhelming at all. She admitted she wanted to get closer to Ben and understand him better, just like someone else. When Ben asked who she meant, she clarified that she was talking about Dako Yun. Ben shouted in surprise, asking if Rachel meant that Dako was friendly. She explained that compared to others, yes, she was friendly and seemed to like him a lot, even if she could be intimidating at times. Ben, confused, said it was not about liking him but more like wanting to possess her, similar to desiring a sharp weapon. Rachel laughed and asked if he really thought that way. Ben wondered why she was laughing, and Rachel said she felt relieved, realizing Ben was not some all-knowing wizard, and that gave her confidence to try harder. She then suggested that since he had already bought her many gifts, she would pick out clothes for him as a thank you. Ben smiled and told her not to worry about the cost and just enjoy the day. He also laughed, saying that going out with a capable man like him felt like a luxury. Rachel dismissed his comment, saying it was nothing. The scene then shifted to a meeting room where Professor Yamina thought it would feel cramped but decided to stay still for a moment, hoping it would be over quickly. Suddenly, other professors shouted at a large screen, furious that information about the tower was being spread recklessly. They questioned how such sensitive knowledge could be shared by someone from a lower dimension and demanded a way to stop it. The head professor intervened, telling Professor Yamina that the students' autonomous actions had gone too far and clearly infringed on the academy's authority. He asked how she planned to take responsibility for allowing him to act freely. Professor Yamina was shocked that Ban Yuan had actually recorded the inside of the tower. She remembered that when he first said he would climb the tower and make a video, no one had strongly opposed it because it seemed impossible. She thought that no external machines or artifacts could work inside the tower due to the strong magic that would overload and break them. Yet Ban had somehow broken that common sense and achieved results, probably without even realizing how impressive it was. She told the robot device that it had done something incredible and reflected that the fact he made a tool that worked inside the tower was ridiculous. She recalled asking Ban if he really planned to publicly post the video online, and he had explained that sharing it could attract attention and support from the academy students, almost like gaining favor for their group. She questioned whether he was sure, warning that spreading the tower information carelessly might cause regret. Ben replied that the hard work was shared by other students as well, and currently, aside from their tool, there was no other way to leave a record, so it was almost like he was monopolizing the information. He added that some sensitive details, like constellations, should be edited, but sharing the rest would benefit everyone. Professor Yamina nodded in admiration, thinking that Ban handled the unfair reality of the academy in a way she had never expected. She handed him the device and reminded him that there would still be some repercussions for his actions. Ben nodded and agreed that the incident could bring both big and small changes, so they needed to quickly establish their position. He wondered if the professor would feel safe watching over them. Professor Yamina thought that one of his intentions might be admirable and lovable. She told him that if he really wanted to feel safe, he should avoid causing accidents, and Ben asked if she really meant that. Yamina felt a strange expectation, thinking that what Ben had fostered might create something immense that could transcend the gap between dimensions. In the present, Professor Alex Cantoni asked how she planned to take responsibility for leaving Ben like that. Yamina felt she wanted to believe in him and support him. She argued that filming and posting the tower video was a personal matter and questioned what the problem was or who should be responsible. Professor Alex laughed and teased her, saying her words sounded like she cared for the student. Professor Talia Luriana told Yamina to speak honestly and asked who Ben was. Yamina replied that he was just an ordinary freshman who entered this year. Professor Ryukilmying disagreed, saying that even as a student, he could not accept spreading the tower information selfishly because it was central to the academy and posting it was an infringement on its authority. Yamina responded that the reason no one had filmed the tower before was because no one had the ability or technology, and that the real discussion should be about how to use Ban's abilities rather than focusing on authority or vested interests. Professor Alex asked Professor Yamina to explain Ban Yuan's abilities and technology so everyone could understand. Professor Talia explained that she had spent 200 years studying the tower and that artifacts created outside could not function inside, especially precise filming equipment. She said no circuits could withstand the tower's mana waves, and it was considered an undeniable law. Yamina added that Ban had managed to do it anyway. Talia was shocked that someone from a lower dimension with no mana had succeeded and demanded the artifact to study its technology. Yamina refused, saying it was a student achievement, and she could not allow anyone to tamper with it. Other professors shouted at her, but Professor Xenon Union intervened, telling everyone to calm down until the heat of the discussion subsided. Talia nodded reluctantly. Xenon acknowledged Talia's 200 years of research, but noted that Ban's artifact was clearly special. Talia admitted she did not know why, but agreed. Xenon said this fact would be hard for other professors to accept. Ryu protested, saying it was reckless to claim Ban had been recognized by the tower after entering it for the first time and being from a lower dimension. Xenon responded that people could choose to believe him or not, and then revealed another important detail. Ban and his classmates were the only initial climbers who had been chosen by the constellations. Professor Talia was shocked that Ban Yuan, who had climbed the tower for the first time just yesterday, had already been chosen by the constellation. Professor Yamina reminded her that contact with the constellation was an individual achievement, and warned her not to speak carelessly. Xenon asked Yamina directly if Ban and the other students had made a contract with the constellation. Yamina replied that none of them had. Xenon explained that it must have been difficult for the students to express their intentions under the constellation's pressure, and said he would have Ban and all of Class 11 attend his lecture. Ryu protested, questioning why students who had not made a contract would benefit from senior-level classes. Xenon clarified that what mattered was being chosen by the constellation, not making a contract. Being chosen proved their exceptionalism, and since they refused the contract, other constellations would likely take an interest in them. He said students chosen by the constellation should attend his lecture, and if Ban had been chosen, he was also his student. Xenon then moved on to the agenda about the tower footage, saying the faculty could not impose anything on Ban. Personal questions and requests about his abilities were allowed, but if anyone pressured him or caused disadvantages, it would be addressed. Yamina realized that the meeting was not about deciding how to treat Ban, but that the vice president was conveying the president's intentions to the faculty. Do not touch Ban Yuan. Xenon warned that anyone, professor or student, who interfered with Ban Yuan would be expelled from the academy and ended the meeting, telling everyone to enjoy the rest of the weekend. Yamina thought it was nice that Ban had gained so much favor with the president. A professor jokingly suggested having a drink with her to celebrate her success with Ban. The next day, students crowded around Ban, introducing themselves and asking questions about him. Maria asked if he was interested in the student council, and Eureka asked if he was really from a low dimension with no mana. Dako wondered why there was such a crowd. Light explained that the channel they had created with the tower footage had gone viral, surpassing 2 million subscribers, and almost everyone in the academy had seen it. Dako realized that compared to his other abilities, filming did not seem that impressive, but seeing people's reactions made her recognize that Ban's ideas and abilities were truly outstanding. Ban asked what was going on, and Rachel congratulated him on a job well done. Light welcomed Ban and teased him about being famous. Ben said it probably felt better than when Light got into arguments over nothing and reminded him to be kind to his fans if they approached him nicely. Light joked that the fuss over the manipulated footage was ridiculous. Ben mentioned that tomorrow he had to fight a huge opponent and guessed that people who doubted the video or disliked him were waiting for him to fail. Light agreed, and Dako told Ben to respond to their expectations as best as he could and that she would support him. Ben nodded with a smile. Later, A professor told Ban and the giant that their duel would be broadcast live on the school's official channel and asked if they agreed. They both nodded yes and were told to sign a document. Ben thought about the duel rules, noting that the fight would end if someone was incapacitated or surrendered. Attacks on vital points were forbidden, but injuries were at their own risk. The giant mocked Ban, asking if he was scared and saying he could surrender by crawling between his legs and barking like a dog, which shocked Ban. At the fighting ground, students murmured and cursed Ban, calling him a lower being and shouting for Erecto to break him apart. Dako asked about the reaction, and Light said the live viewers had already passed 10,000. Dako felt it was unfair that everyone was targeting Ban but said it was expected, since only a few people truly supported them. With so many watching, she believed Ban now had no choice but to prove whether he had the talent to reach the top. Ben thought about the insult Erecto had thrown at him and felt it sounded like something from a cheap novel. He calmly told Erecto that he must have worked hard to provoke him and sarcastically praised the effect it had. Erecto replied that he wondered how long Ban could keep acting calm. Ben answered that whether he was calm or not did not matter and told Erecto to come and find out as he raised his sword. Erecto impatiently shouted for the professor to start the match so he could crush Ban. The professor announced the spar between Class 1 Erecto and Class 11 Ban U1 and declared the start. Erecto immediately rushed forward and swung his fist at Ban with killing intent. Ban watched Erecto charge in with confidence, and thought that his movements were too slow as he calmly dodged. He counterattacked at the right moment and sent Erecto crashing to the ground. Ban realized that to deal with someone as solid as a boulder, the most efficient way was to use the reverse method he had learned. His mind briefly returned to the night after he had gone on a date with Luhel, in the Class 11 sparring room. Dako had guided them and explained that a technique filled with trial and error was only half complete. She said that true mastery meant being able to use the reverse method against any new opponent, or attack. She trained them by attacking with different speeds and forms, saying that if they could counter even once, someone like Erecto would never be able to touch them. Back in the present, Ban realized that Erecto could barely land a hit on him. Erecto was confused and suddenly screamed as he fell again. Ban calmly explained that he had infused his sword with wave energy before striking, and that Erecto's rock-hard body transmitted that energy well. Erecto raged about his injured body, but Ban told him to stop whining and attack, or else end the match there. Erecto tried to grab him in anger, shouting insults and swearing to kill him, but Ban easily dodged every blow. Ban thought Erecto was foolish for repeating the same attack without changing his approach. Since there was no countermeasure, Ban slashed again, cutting Erecto's arm, and decided he would keep countering in the same way. Professor Xenon watched the screen and felt the match was meaningless. Light calmly noted that people still found it hard to believe even after seeing it themselves. Rachel smiled and agreed, thinking Ban had grown unbelievably stronger since he enrolled. The students in the audience murmured in shock, unable to accept that Erecto was taken down so quickly by someone from a lower dimension, and they began to wonder if the skills shown in the video were real. Professor Farrell felt confused, remembering that Ban did not feel this strong just a week ago, and he wondered what had changed so suddenly. Ban stood silently, thinking that attacking an injured opponent would look pathetic, and he wished Erecto would get up and fight again. Professor Farrell then raised his hand and ended the duel, declaring Erecto unable to continue for the protection of both fighters. Ben felt bitter at the word protection, believing no one would have stopped the match if he were the one losing, and he tried to object. But Professor Farrell firmly ended the duel and ordered him to leave the ring. Ben nodded and walked away, saying he understood. Inside, he felt frustrated that the duel ended without a clear win or loss, but he accepted it since he had not lost. Suddenly, a professor shouted and ordered Erecto to stay where he was, reminding him that the duel was already over. The giant trembled with anger and refused to accept the result, feeling humiliated by someone from a lower dimension, and he slammed his fist into the ground while swearing to kill Ban. The professor urgently told Erecto to stop and warned Ban to dodge. Ban gripped his sword and felt angry, questioning why he should dodge when his opponent was clearly trying to kill him. He realized Erecto had heard the orders but chose to ignore the rules out of pride, and Ban also felt fed up with the professors who started the match and ended it whenever they pleased. His anger finally exploded, and as he swung his sword, he cut off the giant's arm. The giant stared in shock and screamed in terror. The professor tried to calm Erecto, saying his arm could be reattached. Ben looked at a system screen that suddenly appeared and felt confused as it showed an option to steal power from Erecto's severed arm. The professor then ordered Erecto to be transported to the medical room and angrily questioned Ban about why he did not dodge the attack. Ban apologized and explained that everything happened too suddenly after the duel ended, making it hard for him to react. The professor accused him of making excuses, but Professor Xenon interrupted through the screen and told him to stop, saying he would handle the situation himself. The professor accepted the order and stepped back. Xenon then greeted Ban and said the professors had seen everything that happened. He explained that from now on he would ask the questions and expected honest answers. Xenon pointed out that Erecto's attack was reckless and that Ban clearly had the ability to dodge it, as the gap in strength between them was obvious, and the duel had been ended for that reason. He then directly asked Ban why he chose not to dodge the attack. Ban Yu-won reflected that even though he had gained the power of language, he had never deeply thought about word spirit, and the question coming from beyond the screen carried a terrifying pressure that made him wonder who Zenon truly was. He then calmly explained that he had chosen not to dodge Erecto's attack and instead counterattacked because a student who ignored the professor's authority deserved to face consequences. He believed that in an official sparring match with strict rules, allowing such behavior would send the wrong message, especially with many students and people from other dimensions watching. Since Erecto ignored the declaration that the match had ended and tried to kill him, Ben felt that responding passively would spread the idea that rules did not apply when dealing with lower dimension students. Even though the decision was made in a short moment, Ben believed his actions were justified and meant to protect the Academy's principles. Professor Zenon thought that Ben answered cleverly by turning a personal conflict into a matter concerning the entire school, and while he could not deny the situation, he still had his stance. Zenon then stated that Ban's words were correct and that students who broke sparring rules deserved punishment, but he emphasized that enforcing such punishment was the responsibility of the Academy and its professors, not a student. Professor Farrell watched with tension and felt certain that no matter how Ban argued, standing against the vice principal meant his position was now in serious danger. Ban Yu-won admitted that the professors were right and apologized if his actions crossed their authority, saying he was ready to accept punishment. Zenon calmly replied that punishment was never the main issue and that he was only curious about Ban's thinking. He realized that Ban had the determination and speaking skill to gain a Constellation's favor, and he concluded that the real fault lay with Erecto for ignoring the end of the match and attacking. Because of that, Zenon acknowledged Ban's actions as justified self-defense. Professor Farrell tried to object, but Zenon firmly stopped him and criticized his failure to properly restrain Erecto, saying this situation could have been avoided. He stated that Farrell would also be held responsible and added that reattaching Erecto's arm was not difficult. Zenon then ended the matter and ordered the watching students to return to their seats and focus on their studies. Daoko noted that the incident ended without further trouble, and Light agreed. Zenon told Ban that he had done well and allowed him to leave, adding that they would meet again. Ben bowed and walked away, later meeting Light and Rachel, who greeted him warmly. Ben thanked them for cheering him on, while Light praised the swordsmanship he showed at the end of the fight. Ben replied that his battles against elite monsters in the tower must have helped, and Rachel expressed relief that he was not hurt. Daoko smiled and said she enjoyed watching the fight, noticing that Ben had grown stronger again, and asking how it felt to gain new power. Ben replied that it was because of her strict training in the mysteries. She then pointed out that he had absorbed the arm he cut off, and Ben admitted it was true, recalling his shock when the system showed it was possible and actually worked. He explained that until now he could not freely manipulate the concepts of living people, but by cutting off a specific part, he was able to absorb the strength of Erecto's right arm. Daoko said that sounded like a good thing, but Ban looked troubled. He admitted that although he was happy at first about becoming stronger, he later realized he had cut off a human arm, not a monster's. Feeling joy after harming a person made him feel strange and uncomfortable. Daoko firmly told him to lift his head and reminded him that Erecto had tried to kill him, and the loss of an arm was the result of that choice. She told him not to worry about the feelings of someone who aimed for his life. Ben smiled and agreed, apologizing for overthinking and saying it was pointless to worry about such things. Daoko jokingly suggested cutting off the arms of others in the special class, which made Ban reply that such thinking was exactly what scared him. At that moment, he suddenly looked at the screen again and shouted in surprise when something new appeared. Ban Yu-won reacted in disbelief when he learned he had been placed into a mandatory additional course with no right to refuse. The notice explained that it was a special class by Professor Zenon about drawing support from constellations, negotiating contracts, avoiding their anger, and even switching between constellations, a course normally meant only for fourth-year seniors, yet Class 11 was invited as well. As they walked through the area, students whispered while watching the lower dimension group pass by, mocking them and wondering why they were on the fourth-year floor, a place known only for Professor Zenon's lecture hall. Hearing the insults, Ben casually joked that in his world there was a rumor that being cursed a lot made people live longer. Daoko replied that he must be immortal by now. Rachel looked worried and asked if Ban was alright, fearing that more people would dislike him after what happened, since many spoke badly without knowing who he really was. Ben reassured her that he was fine, admitting it hurt a little but saying it was better than being underestimated like before, and he thanked her for caring. Daoko then teased the two of them, pointing out how close they seemed after spending the weekend together, and joking about Ban's obvious behavior, ending her comment with sharp humor. Rachel teased Daoko by asking if she was jealous, which made Daoko react in shock and snap back angrily. Ben quickly stepped in to calm her down, and reminded them that the first lecture was about to start. He stood in front of the door, checked that it was the Constellations of Babyloni lecture hall, and made sure they were not late. Light quietly worried about how the senior students would feel if lower dimension freshmen joined the class midway. Ben brushed it off confidently, saying the seniors would probably think talented juniors had joined them, and then he opened the door. Daoko observed the room and thought that, As expected from seniors, their skills could not be ignored. Ben also realized that this class was clearly filled with extraordinary people. Professor Xenon welcomed Class 11 and said he was glad to have them in his lecture. He introduced himself as their supervising professor and told everyone to sit wherever they felt comfortable. Xenon explained that the goal of the lecture was simple: to understand the origins of the tower and the constellations. Since new juniors had joined, he decided to begin by explaining the tower itself. He described the tower not as a meaningless structure but as something similar to a living organism. As people climbed it, they overcame trials and drew closer to hidden treasures and secrets. Xenon explained that rewards were not simply found by chance but were prepared by the tower itself to reach those it selected. The tower chose outstanding climbers by offering better items, greater treasures, and deeper miracles, revealing its secrets to those who tried to understand both the tower and themselves. Ban Yu-won silently questioned Xenon's explanation, finding it hard to believe that the tower was alive, thinking, and choosing its own climbers. He recalled how a single irregular intruder had disrupted the system through a strange route, and wondered how something so fragile could be called alive. Then he remembered that the Chancellor's mass message was sent shortly after the intruder entered the tower, which made everyone assume the strange events in Room 4 were caused by that intruder. However, when he thought more carefully, the difficulty had already felt abnormal from Room 1. The monster that killed Lewis instantly was clearly an elite, and the extreme difficulty of Rooms 1 to 3 could not be explained if the tower only changed after the intrusion. As his thoughts deepened, Ban considered a different possibility. He wondered if the tower's difficulty did not change because of the intruder, but because they themselves had started climbing. He questioned whether the tower was actually thinking on its own and deliberately placing them into harsher trials. Another thought crossed his mind, that maybe the change happened because he, a descendant of the tower's master, had begun climbing, though he immediately felt that idea sounded self-centered and unrealistic. While Ban was lost in these thoughts, Light noticed his expression and asked what was wrong. Professor Xenon smiled as Ban Yu-won decided not to overthink the matter. Ban felt that if the tower truly thought for itself and chose its climbers as Xenon said, then there could be no better environment than this one. Their class faced dangers and situations far beyond others, and he believed that high risk would bring high reward, meaning the tower's rewards must be on a completely different level. Even so, the strange atmosphere of the classroom still confused him. Xenon then explained that the classroom was surrounded by a barrier, which many students failed to notice even after years. He praised Rachel and Ban for sensing the hidden orb on the very first day and said their intuition was sharp. Xenon added that even as first-year students, Class 11 was clearly qualified to attend this lecture. He then questioned Ban and asked what he could see inside the sphere. Ban answered that he saw nothing, but Xenon urged him to focus more and check again. Ban still saw nothing, yet Xenon encouraged him to focus once more and uncover the orb's secret. At that moment, Ban's eyes widened as he sensed layers like barriers and protection, but even then, he realized he still could not fully grasp what lay beyond. Professor Xenon told Ban Yu-won to close his eyes and rest, thinking that Ban was truly extraordinary for uncovering 3 of the orb's core abilities and realizing why the headmaster paid such close attention to him. He asked Ban if he understood what the orb was, and Ban admitted he did not. The professor explained that he wanted to emphasize the importance of expanding thinking and imagination, both in class and daily life. He said that expanding thought directly increased power, and to use abilities in advanced ways, students needed to develop the power of thought and their ability to think. Even if the answers were not immediately clear, they should never stop thinking. Ben asked if someone with high cognitive ability or imagination could control the orb, and Xenon confirmed that was correct. He explained that understanding the structure of all things, analyzing them, and developing the ability to expand them could eventually make the orb turn someone into a pseudo-god. Xenon admitted it might be hard to understand now, but over the course of the lecture, they would gradually grasp it. He added that this material was central to his lecture and connected to the main lecture, Simulated Constellation War. Finally, he ended the class and assigned the students to imagine possible applications of the orb before the next session. Ben Yu-won thought the lecture was extremely complicated and confusing, wondering what a pseudo-god even meant and what the principle behind becoming a god was. Light suggested they just go back, and Ben admitted the class was way too difficult for their year. While walking, he asked if someone could explain the lecture again. Light assumed Ban would naturally summarize it for them. Suddenly, Ortama appeared, surprising Ban, who shouted in shock. Ortama demanded silence and questioned why they were all gathered together. Daco explained she had thought something serious had happened. Ortama confirmed her identity and said he had business with her. Daco assumed it was a duel request and warned him that dueling inside the academy would be difficult, but Ortama clarified that it was not a duel. Instead, he knelt and held flowers, surprising everyone by asking Daco out on a date. The surrounding students were shocked by the sudden confession. Ban Yu-won was shocked and wondered what kind of person could fall for a woman who had beaten him so badly. Light teased him that he had already answered his own question, but Ban refused to admit it. Daco asked how a man could not understand another man's feelings, saying she had actually been curious about his plan and wanted to ask him. Ban was confused and asked what plan she meant. Daco explained that it was obvious Ortama had an ulterior motive, and that his gaze showed no affection. Ban protested, saying it did not feel that way at all and admitted that she was incredibly pretty. Daco blushed at his casual compliment. Light warned her that it was Ban's trick and not to fall for it, but Daco said she already knew and did not need his advice. Rachel wondered if there was really another motive, recalling how Daco had told Ortama she had no interest in him and wanted him to leave. Ben nodded in agreement, and Rachel noticed Ortama's disappointed expression as he left. A screen appeared showing that Ban Yu-won had exposed his presence to many beings, engraving his existence into them, and that he had learned a new language concept called Charm and Honor, which had reached depth 10. Ben thought about how the concept appeared right after he uploaded his weekly channel video, and wondered how it would help him climb the tower. He then asked Rachel if his face looked different, and she replied that he looked very handsome. Ben protested that it was not what he meant. Daco stepped forward and scolded them to focus on sparring when training and to rest properly when resting, warning that if they did not obey, she would make them train until morning. Ben teased Daco again about whether his face looked different, but she ignored him and insisted they focus on training. Ben agreed and told Rachel to continue training, so they began sparring seriously. Light noticed how much Ban had grown stronger and suggested it might be time to stop focusing on dungeons. Daco said not to be soft, explaining that although Ban had grown, he was still far behind Light and herself, and their sparring only worked because one side was going easy. She also worried about entering the tower the next day and wondered if Ban had figured out how to handle the beast, fearing that without a solution, they would repeat the same mistakes as last week. Over the past week, Ben Yu-won had been observing Rachel closely and discovered how her rampage trigger worked. He realized that any emotion could fuel it, and the type of emotion changed her state drastically. Negative and intense emotions made her burn hotter and lose control, while positive and calm emotions helped her rampage subside and stabilized her feelings. He thought that in battle, intense emotions usually made rampages unavoidable, but if he could change the fuel to something positive, he might be able to control it. Now standing face to face with Rachel, Ben felt it was time to act. He reflected on how he had spent the past week collecting bits of her true emotions, times when she was happy, having fun, or at peace. These were not artificial emotions, but copies taken directly from her essence. Confident in his preparation, he rushed forward, believing his plan was bound to work. Ben Yu-won thought to absorb Rachel's energy, but she slashed his hand and slammed him to the ground. Daco quickly intervened and caught Rachel's hand with her chain, causing Rachel to scream. Ben noticed that Rachel had been moving faster after being chained and realized it was a relief that she calmed down quickly. He thought that while there had been a change, waiting to wrap her up every fight was too dangerous, and he wondered what exactly had caused the improvement. Rachel thanked Ban, saying that because of him she could fight more easily and that this was already a huge improvement. Ben reminded her that they had not fully solved the problem yet. Suddenly he shouted at Daco, surprised that she was stopping their training, and she told him she could see their effort but decided it was time to rest. Rachel murmured in disappointment that the session was ending already. Later, in front of the building, Light suggested to Daco that it might be better to use the holy sword when entering the tower, noting that the fate of all four of them was at stake. Daco replied that they had agreed to build a solid foundation without rushing, and since it was only their second exploration as freshmen, there was no need to worry. Ben Yu-won noticed that Light did not seem aware that the more he used the holy sword, the more dependent he became on it. Ben felt uneasy about the mixed concept of a demon spirit and sacred spirit within the sword and was no longer sure it could truly be called holy, so he believed it was better to keep it away if it had negative effects. Light agreed reluctantly and joked that if he collapsed in the tower, they should not blame him. Daco replied that they would not blame him but would make him suffer even more. Ben smiled and added that they would not blame him, but millions of subscribers would be watching, which made Light shout in frustration. Ben then looked at the robot device and said he would count on both of them again this time. Rachel promised to do her best from the inside and said she would listen to everything Ben said. Ben told her to trust him, saying he was naturally strong in real combat, and Rachel smiled and said she trusted him. Daco ended by saying she just hoped Ben could last until at least Saturday evening, and then asked him to come over for a moment. Ben Yu-won asked Daco what she wanted to say, and she explained that there were a few things to clarify before they headed out. She reminded them that today was the first evaluation and admitted she was quite disappointed so far, asking if they had not forgotten the promise they made with her. Ben reassured her that of course they had not forgotten and that both Rachel and Light had already started changing, so the results would happen as he said. Daco then brought up something about the beast that she had not finished explaining the day before. She flicked her fingers, which made Rachel, hiding behind a wall, scream. Ben noticed and teased her about trying to eavesdrop, while Daco said the beast was becoming bolder in front of him. Ben thought that only Rachel seemed able to hear the noise. Daco asked Ben if he knew the meaning of submission. He answered that it meant being dominated, and she said he was not entirely wrong. She explained that while being dominated could feel uncomfortable, some people found stability under strong leadership. In that sense, the beast seemed to genuinely want someone who could completely dominate and control it. Ben was confused, and Dako clarified that when the beast became uncontrollable, trying to communicate with it half-heartedly was useless. Ben Yuan admitted that he had no idea what Dako meant. Dako got frustrated and told him to just memorize it if he didn't understand. Ben agreed to keep it in mind even if he didn't fully get it. Light asked if they were ready to go, and Ben nodded, calling everyone to begin their second exploration as special admission, first year, class 11. He opened the door, and they stepped out. Dako commented that she had expected to start from room 1, but it seemed that was not the case. Light wondered if it was a maze this time. Ben checked his pendant and realized they were on the 5th floor, which Light said was a relief. Dako teased Light for getting complacent, but he denied it. Rachel said she smelled a monster from their direction, and Ben asked if she had found a monster instead of the path. Suddenly, Light shouted in alarm, recognizing something and asking if it was the cloister they had encountered in room 1. Ben Yuan realized that what they were facing was different from before, noticing an unpleasant crackling noise and twisted distortions that made it seem like it was breaking down. A screen appeared showing various concepts like glitch, demon spirit, light, noise, malfunction, and inversion. Ben thought it was a glitch phenomenon where disrupted signals distorted graphics and sound, creating an eerie, monster-like effect. He considered collecting it since the glitch included inversion, which seemed useful. Dako called out to Ben to stay focused and warned that clearing these while escaping the maze would be difficult. She told them to be careful not to get separated and led the way. Light shouted that these things kept appearing, and Dako identified them as mental-type monsters. Ben thought that even though he was slowly accumulating inversion, capturing 100 of them to use as an ability seemed like a lot of effort. Suddenly they felt attacked, and Rachel rushed forward. Ben told her not to fight alone and warned that she might go berserk, asking her to stick by his side. She agreed, blushing. Dako told Ben and Rachel to stop flirting and keep moving. Ben decided to put aside the concepts appearing on the maze walls for now. Rachel warned him that a bunch of glitches were about to appear, and Ben focused on gathering inversion from them. Light complained about when the maze would ever end, and Dako said it was strange because she had been memorizing every path they took. Ben noted that even though the path looked different, it felt familiar. Dako explained that the maze was changing in real time and the only way to deal with it was to destroy the entire maze. Ben realized he had been too focused on collecting inversion and had overlooked something. Dako said that destroying everything would force something to reveal itself. Ben pressed the wall, reasoning that a constantly shifting path did not make sense and there must be a trick hidden within. A screen appeared showing that the concept illusion had been stolen, and Ben smiled, knowing his guess was correct. Rachel asked Ben how he managed to break through the maze, and Light noted that he was even breaking through it. Ben thought that he had noticed the gap earlier but had been too focused on collecting concepts to mention it. He said he did not like wasting time and had simply walked around for a few hours until he found the part that felt off. Dako thought it was impressive that he had found a gap in the magic she had not noticed and realized he was more than just a genius. Later, Light praised their team for facing an elite on only their second expedition. Ben noticed something strange despite absorbing more than enough concepts over the past 3 hours. His magic power would not go beyond 200. He wondered what was going on. Dako asked what was wrong, noting he did not seem injured. Ben explained that even after defeating an elite, his magic power was not growing. Dako explained that he had hit a wall because he had been absorbing energy too quickly without giving it time to expand, and warned that he would reach his limit soon. And Yuan asked what he should do about his limit. Dako told him that blindly hunting monsters was not the best way and suggested a more efficient method, which included taking breaks, getting fresh air, eating well, and even going shopping. Ben said he was willing to learn and even go out for food and shopping if she taught him. Dako agreed but warned that it would take some time. Light said he did not mind helping Ben since defeating an elite had not increased his power. Dako explained that the best method for now was learning the basics of the art of divine manifestation, a simple martial art that would not be too difficult. Ben asked if he should perform a formal apprentice ceremony since he was being properly taught, but Dako said it was just basic internal training and he should forget about ceremonies. Ben nodded, and Dako thought it was surprising that he cared about formalities, knowing that the art of divine manifestation was normally a secret technique passed down through bloodlines and that her father would be shocked to know she was teaching him. And Yuan asked if he really had to take off his shirt. Dako thought it was strange that she was teaching a secret family martial art to such a reckless man and that it would never be allowed unless he were her husband. Light and Rachel blushed. Dako told him to sit properly and focus. She thought about how his talent and potential in martial arts were astonishing and wondered what would happen if he grew systematically, while also not wanting anyone else to influence him. She asked if he was ready, and Ben asked if she would normally recite a mantra first. She laughed and said it was better to teach it by ingraining it into his body, and that explaining it in words would take too long. Ben thought that if he said he learned martial arts from novels he would get hit. Dako said they should begin, and Ben was surprised. Dako taught Ban Yuan a new technique called divine manifestation that would change the nature of his chi, magic power, and body. Ban Yuan thought it would be a simple martial art, but it felt much stronger than he expected. Dako explained that training chi naturally changes its nature and that the altered magic power stimulates the body, which uses magic power to create pure chi. Ban Yuan felt the technique intensely as if fire was entering his body, consuming his magic power and creating new paths inside him. Dako told him to stay calm, follow the paths in his body, and keep moving the divine chi, saying that if he succeeded, he would discover the next path on his own. Ban Yuan felt the blue flames moving inside his body and started to feel more comfortable. He realized that using magic power directly was not always the best and felt he had truly learned the technique. His soul depth and resistance increased, and all the concepts in his body were being replaced with divine chi. He smiled, feeling that training was making all his powers stronger and thinking about what gift he wanted. Dako told him to wipe his sweat before climbing the tower alone. Ban Yuan felt the divine chi circulating more as he focused, making his body stronger and his senses sharper. He was amazed that such an effective martial art was being taught for free. Light asked about recording the situation, but Ban Yuan decided to ignore it and started heading out. Light suggested it was time for lunch and asked if everyone was hungry. Ban Yuan agreed since they had wasted time and it was time to eat. Dako said they had been in room 5 for so long that they might not be able to eat until reaching room 6. Light joked about meal rules, and Dako told him to focus on finding the exit. Light quickly found a path to room 6, and Ban Yuan sensed traces of another concept outside the door. Dako said they should follow it, but Light thought they might be going the wrong way. Ban Yuan realized the wall was full of illusions and broke them with his barrier. Light was surprised, and Dako explained it was a shortcut. Ban Yuan felt amazed at finding such a hidden path and asked what to do next. Light smiled, and Dako said they had to move forward. Ban Yuan told Eve to eat well and noticed that the floor seemed to change as they climbed since there was no separate shift. Dako suggested the stairs themselves might be the shift and told Light to walk straight. Light worried about something jumping out, but Dako told him to just fight it. Rachel announced they had reached floor 8, and Ban Yuan realized they had skipped 3 floors at once. Dako praised him for finding an amazing shortcut, and Ban Yuan admitted he did not expect it to be such a big shortcut. Light reminded them that skipping floors made the next one harder, and Dako added that the rewards would also be greater. Light complained about shortcuts, and Ban Yuan wondered why he seemed so scared compared to the last expedition. Light worried about the increasing difficulty and wished he could use the holy sword, while Dako teased him about it. Rachel then spotted an exit while looking at a door. Ban Yuan noticed that the student card showed floor 8, so the floor beyond the exit should be floor 9. Rachel warned him to be careful, sensing hostility similar to when an irregular appeared before. Dako said it was good to be cautious and told Light to draw his sword on the next floor. Light shouted excitedly that he would handle everything, and Dako found his mood changes annoying. Later in a cave, Ban Yuan saw the area had no monsters and a high ceiling, and Light asked if it was a rest area. Ban Yuan doubted it because the terrain did not match the rest area of floor 10. Suddenly, a large dark ball appeared and shook the ground. Dako asked Ban Yuan about it, noting that only he could usually use such a weapon. Ban Yuan thought it was probably a one-time use and noticed Light firing from nowhere, quickly pointing him out. Light rushed forward to respond. The man in the cloak was surprised that Light had found his location and wondered how his stealth skill was detected. Light shouted at him while slashing his sword. The man decided to draw Light out first and then attack the whole group. Ban Yuan checked on DONGHUA, realizing the first shot could have been dangerous. DONGHUA agreed it probably would have been. Rachel identified the attack as a powerful magic bomb, and Ban Yuan told everyone to step back. The bomb stopped, and Ban Yuan decided the attacker would pay for trying something like that. The man fighting Light was impressed by his skills but tried to detonate the bomb, only to be surprised when it reflected off a wall and did not explode. Light scolded him for looking away and struck with his sword. The wounded man felt confused and said the situation was strange. Light questioned him and pointed out that he was human, asking why he attacked them and how he entered the place. Ban Yuan stepped forward and mocked him, saying he noticed the stealth at once and even saw the bomb hidden inside the bullet. He blamed the man's overconfidence and called him foolish for trusting such a defective trick. The man clenched his teeth in shock and questioned who they really were, unable to believe that a newbie from the lower floors could have such power. Dako struck him and said she needed to break his arms and legs before any calm talk. Rachel lost control and insisted they must kill him now or everyone would die, then started beating him. Ban Yuan quickly restrained her with chains and told her to calm down. At that moment a cold voice spoke of failure, and heavy pressure filled the air. Ban Yuan felt it instantly and Dako realized it was the presence of a constellation. The constellation observed the scene and said the man's role was already over. The man panicked and begged for another chance, claiming he could still kill them. The constellation ordered him to sacrifice himself for his comrades, and the man screamed in denial as a violent blast erupted and shook the ground. Ban Yu-won shouted for everyone to stay back, knowing it was already too late. When the dust settled, Daco cried out in fear, but Ban Yu-won was sitting on the ground laughing and said he almost saw the Samsara River. Light rushed to him in shock and asked how he was still fine. Ban Yu-won recalled how he realized he could not dodge the attack and instead used the magic bomb concept he had absorbed earlier to counter the explosion with another explosion. Daco understood and said he stopped the blast with a blast. Ban Yu-won replied that if he had been any later, it would have been a disaster. Light then asked what happened to the attacker, and Ban Yu-won casually said the man was probably fine and might have fallen to the first floor. The constellation corrected him and declared the man was dead, as the tower had accepted his death during the battle. Ban Yu-won smiled and rejected that idea, saying the constellation was the one who forced the man to explode and that they only acted to survive. The constellation admitted it had sacrificed a valuable member and gained nothing, and regretted not being cautious once the tower began treating Ban Yu-won as special. Ban Yu-won mocked it and demanded clear answers, asking what it really was and what happened to the man from earlier. The constellation only declared that they were Exodus, their enemies, and then disappeared. Ban Yu-won felt the energy fade and realized those constellations were far from ordinary in both actions and words. Rachel repeated the name Exodus, and Light explained it was not a person but a famous dimension pirate group that existed across many worlds, and that the constellation was likely their sponsor. Ban Yu-won was shocked as he remembered Professor Yamina mentioning those dimension pirates before. Light grew anxious and questioned why such a group was now targeting them. Daco remained calm and said they would have met them eventually while climbing, and facing them early might even be beneficial. Ban Yu-won agreed with her. Light pointed out that something felt wrong and stressed that the constellation had confirmed the tower was treating only them as special, questioning why they alone were facing such harsh treatment. Ban Yu-won suddenly noticed a strange pattern and wondered if it was another message from the principal. Daco denied it and said her level had increased. The others quickly realized the same had happened to them, leaving Ban Yu-won stunned. Daco noticed that her level had increased for the first time since enrolling, and wondered if it was a reward from the tower for enduring the constellation's attack. Light agreed that if that was the reason, it was frustrating but still acceptable. Rachel smiled as she felt her stats rise sharply. Ban Yu-won reflected that they all used status windows, but their stat limits had been so high that their levels had not increased until now. He briefly wondered if the tower was ignoring him, but then sensed a strange remaining string of energy where the enemy had vanished and realized it might be his share. When he absorbed it, mana surged around him and he was shocked by the result, seeing an absurdly high life value and gaining unfamiliar concepts. He felt that metamorphosis was superior to transformation and that Star Scar was likely connected to constellations, yet he had no idea how to use them. He decided to give metamorphosis to Eve, thinking she could make better use of it. Eve consumed it happily. Soon after, Rachel noticed something wrong, and Ban Yu-won reacted in shock when Eve suddenly turned into an egg. Rachel recalled that this had happened once before, but Ban Yu-won pointed out that last time she hatched immediately, while this time she did not. Light guessed that Eve was taking longer because it was her second evolution. Daco added that the child had probably leveled up as well. Rachel sensed a warm energy coming from the egg. Ban Yu-won grew anxious and wondered what to do now, worrying that they had lost the only way to calm Rachel during emergencies. Light pointed out that the next room was a rest floor and hoped Eve would wake up by then. As they moved on, Rachel felt the shift begin. Light realized they had reached the 10th floor, a place known only from stories, where some unlucky groups found no food or drink, though this area was different. Ban Yu-won felt they had been lucky. Light explained that the fruits there were eaten fruits that recovered fatigue and increased potential, and said they were essential during rest zones. Ban Yu-won ate one and was amazed by the taste, calling it the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. Daco agreed and said it was the sweetest flavor she had ever felt, even sensing a small rise in her inner energy, and wondered if they should eat everything before leaving. Light replied that it was not allowed since the effect only worked one at a time. Daco complained about how stingy the rule was. Ban Yu-won felt regret that they could not take all the fruits with them, and wondered if there was a way. A screen suddenly appeared and informed him that he had eaten Eden's only fruit, the fruit of knowledge, and that from now on his all red eye could distinguish sins. Ban Yu-won was confused and questioned what this fruit meant, whether it was because of the fig-like fruit he ate, and what standard was used to judge sins. Soon after, Rachel discovered a mysterious box and called everyone over. Daco guessed it was a reward for their achievements, and said that even the lowest grade chest should hold something special, considering what they had endured. Ban Yu-won agreed and recalled how they had faced constellations twice, experiencing hardships other teams might never face. He believed it was a settlement reward, explaining that each rest zone contained a treasure chest that reflected accumulated achievements, with grades based on material from wood to gold. Light smiled and suggested opening it, but Daco stopped him and insisted that Ban Yu-won should open it instead, claiming Light was unlucky. Light protested loudly, but Daco bluntly said he was simply unlucky. Ban Yu-won went ahead and opened the chest, and Rachel stared inside and asked what the strange magic staff was. Rachel examined the item and felt that it had no clear function, wondering if it was only a ceremonial tool because of its strange shape. Daoko sensed a strong aura from it, and concluded that it had to be an artifact. Banyu-won studied it, and realized from its design that it resembled a magical tool from his own world, likely tied to magic-related concepts, and holding a high soul value. When Daoko asked if he had figured something out, Banyu-won explained that it was probably a beginner magical teaching tool with an ego inside it that could teach knowledge to its user. Light reacted in disbelief and tested it, shocked that such a thing was real. Banyu-won then asked if he could keep the artifact, offering to pay for it and suggesting they study it later. Light agreed easily, saying Banyu-won had already worked harder than anyone. Rachel also supported the idea, naturally saying Banyu-won should have it. Banyu-won found Rachel's reasoning strange but thanked them with a smile, feeling the artifact would help him greatly. As he moved ahead, Light warned him not to pick any more items, but Banyu-won told him to just follow for now. Light questioned what Banyu-won planned to do with all the items, reminding him that they disappeared once taken outside the rest zone. Banyu-won agreed but said it was still worth trying since there was nothing to lose, and declared he would pay for it right away. Daoko was confused and asked if he meant paying in cash, but Banyu-won denied it and told Light to bring the basket, bottle, and jam from earlier and follow him. Rachel and Daoko recognized the items and grew curious. Banyu-won explained that the rules around eaten fruits were strange, such as only one being usable per person and the fruits vanishing outside, and wondered what would happen if they were fused with another item or consumed in a different form. He believed that breaking an untested rule was worth the risk. As he tried it, a message appeared announcing the successful fusion of an eaten fruit with a basic elixir, creating Life Elixir 30, which greatly restored life and magic and offered new possibilities, though overuse could cause divine punishment. Light was shocked and asked how he managed to do it. Rachel realized that the jam from before had likely been made the same way. Banyu-won warned that they could not consume it yet due to the current room's rules and said they needed to leave first to test it. Daoko immediately suggested moving on and asked if everyone was ready. Light and Rachel agreed that they were fully rested, and Daoko led the group as they moved out together. Soon after, Light announced that they had reached the 11th floor. Daoko immediately asked Banyu-won about the elixir. Banyu-won checked the screen and smiled when he confirmed that it had worked. Daoko hugged him in excitement, then quickly pushed him away after realizing how close she was. Light pointed out that she had just hugged Banyu-won, while Banyu-won admitted he was even more surprised than Light. Moments later, Light sensed danger and warned that the floor 11 monster had appeared. A message identified it as a shell beast with an extremely hard shell that appeared in large numbers. Banyu-won shouted as he ran forward, complaining about the perfect timing. Daoko laughed and said she was glad prey had appeared to help her digest the elixir, and charged ahead with enthusiasm. Banyu-won silently regretted not making something other than an elixir. 10 hours later on the 14th floor, Daoko wondered why she was still not hungry. Banyu-won admitted he did not expect the feeling of fullness to last half a day. Light joked that they were probably the only team skipping several floors just to digest food, then complained that he could not take another step. Daoko guessed the effect might wear off by the 15th floor. As the time reached late night, they decided to stop. Banyu-won agreed that resting was best and pointed out that Rachel was on the verge of losing control. Daoko remarked that in Rachel's current state, it would not be strange if she lost her sanity at any moment. Banyu-won agreed and explained that this was why he opposed moving further, suggesting they skip meals, wash up, and rest for the day, then head to the 15th floor tomorrow. He soon handed something out and told everyone to wash with it. When asked about himself, he said he would wash later because he wanted to focus on the manifestation technique. Daoko encouraged him, saying the technique improved with practice, and decided to leave with the beast to wash without disturbing him. Banyu-won then called Light and told him to come wash as well. Light reacted strongly and refused, saying it made no sense for him to wash with women. Banyu-won found his reaction strange and told him to wash there instead. Light complained that it was vulgar. Banyu-won argued that if it was with men, it should be fine, but Light still refused and said he could not expose himself in front of others. When Banyu-won asked what he wanted instead, Light told him to turn his head and warned him not to peek. Banyu-won agreed and said he understood. The next day, Light protested when told not to wield the sword, worried about how far they had come. Daoko reminded him that he had done well without it since floor 7 and said it was because he was becoming more accustomed to combat. Banyu-won agreed. Light argued that floor 7 had only weak monsters and that they could not risk fighting stronger enemies without the holy sword. Daoko agreed and allowed him to use it, making Light very happy to hold it again. Banyu-won checked with Daoko, and she said there was no choice since Light had reached his mental limit. Daoko then asked Rachel why she was acting strangely after eating well, and Banyu-won guessed it might be because she was on guard. Daoko laughed, noting her shift from obsession to jealousy and worried about the party's future. Banyu-won asked if they were ready, and Daoko questioned why he asked her. On floor 15, orcs charged at them shouting and Light attacked them with his sword, telling them to get lost. Banyu-won thought that without Light wielding the sword, he would have been in big trouble. Daoko told him it was not the time to think about that. When an orc attacked Banyu-won, Daoko protected him and Praken also helped. Ban Yuan thanked them both and Dako warned him to be careful. Ban Yuan noticed Rachel was close to going berserk and that Eve was still asleep, realizing he might have to attempt a risky strategy again if things got worse. An orc then shouted his name and threatened to kill him, claiming he was the weakest. Ban Yuan smiled and asked how the orc knew, while Light dismissed the orc as just another tower monster as he cut it down. Light charged forward, slashing his sword and thinking he had captured an elite, while only small enemies remained. He recalled the orcs from his homeland and felt confident that his holy sword could easily defeat them. Dako scolded him for attacking without coordination. Ban Yuan noted that the last enemy was down and that the shift would begin soon. Dako reminded everyone that they had agreed to move to the next floor after regrouping. Light dismissed her concern, saying that with him and the holy sword, the next floor could be cleared easily and joked about leaving loot for the others. Dako gave him a cold glare, and Ban Yuan tried to calm everyone while wondering why Light was acting so strangely. Suddenly, the environment began to change, and Ban Yuan realized that the floor itself was transforming into a chessboard. Light was shocked as the space shifted around them. Rachel suddenly collapsed to the ground, and Ban Yuan rushed to her in alarm, asking if she was hurt. She grabbed his arm and said she could no longer hold back, showing she was about to lose control. Ban Yuan realized this was exactly why they needed a break before the shift. At that moment, an orc stepped forward and introduced himself as Captain Curious of the Rusted Halberd Battalion, accusing them of killing his subordinates and vowing revenge. Ban Yuan was confused when Curious spoke of comrades, realizing they were now on the 16th floor and suspecting the floors were connected. A screen then announced the rule of floor 16, stating that the weakest soldier must charge first. Curious demanded that the weakest human step forward. Ban Yuan calmly said that would be him, but Light objected and claimed there was no need to follow such a rule. Before Ban Yuan could stop him, Light attacked Curious in rage. Curious questioned if Light was the weakest, denied it, and in that moment a message appeared declaring a rule violation. Light's abilities were reduced as a penalty, and he was left in shock when he realized he could no longer move. Curious slashed his weapon with brutal force and threw Light away, leaving him badly wounded, and with that the player Light was eliminated and lost the fight. The tower revealed the nature of the trick floor, a place ruled by special laws where rewards were high but punishment was merciless if rules were broken. Ban Yuan felt his chest sink as he realized the disaster, knowing the tower had already set the difficulty for 4 players and would never adjust it even if members dropped out. He cursed Light in his thoughts, feeling angry and desperate, understanding that without full strength the expedition was almost doomed. Curious laughed wildly, praising Light as a stupidly strong human who still managed to wound him even while falling, and his battle hunger only grew stronger as his body swelled with power. Ban Yuan stared in shock, sensing something was terribly wrong and suspecting that breaking the rule had caused Curious to grow even stronger. Dako spoke coldly, saying she knew the sword affected his mind but never expected it to turn him so reckless and foolish. Ban Yuan agreed, feeling uneasy because Curious had never been this impulsive before, and the situation felt unnatural, as if suggesting that Kerr's sword during the expedition had caused a serious backlash. Dako admitted she was unsure of the cause, but she was certain the sword could not be trusted and that Curious would repeat the same mistake at a critical moment, so she decided she would take responsibility and drill that lesson into him herself. Ban Yuan told himself that for now they should focus on Curious and somehow survive the floor, but Dako immediately rejected the idea, believing that continuing the expedition after losing one member was meaningless. She rushed forward without hesitation, deciding to use this moment to witness firsthand how severe the punishment of breaking a trick floor's rules truly was. Curious roared in disbelief, sensing that she was not the weakest among them and accusing her of breaking the rules again. Dako clenched her teeth as she moved, thinking that she would leave first and entrusting Ban Yuan with the rest, reminding him not to forget the words she had spoken before entering the tower. Curious attacked her with killing intent, shouting as he charged, but she met him head-on and slashed with her sword, making Ban Yuan's eyes widen in shock. The screen appeared and announced a rule violation, declaring a penalty that caused a decline in ability, and confirming that player DONGHUA was lost. Even so, Curious screamed in rage, unable to accept that the seemingly fragile human had dared to sever his arm. Ban Yuan spoke with cold resolve, stating that even if Curious had been strengthened by the penalty, he was clearly no longer in condition to fight, and swore that for the 2 who had sacrificed themselves before him, he would make sure Curious died before he moved on. Curious mocked him in return, wondering if the weakest one was finally stepping forward, only to scoff as if that were not the case. At that moment, Rachel suddenly appeared behind Ban Yuan, causing his eyes to widen in pure shock as he recognized her presence. Ban Yuan shouted as he tried to stop Rachel, desperately warning her not to break the rules because they had no idea what kind of power Curious might gain if she did. He realized in panic that she was not listening at all, and with no other choice left, he focused everything on planting positive emotions into her mind, remembering how the attempt had been blocked halfway before and believing that this time it would work. In the middle of it, confusion struck him when Rachel suddenly clutched her throat and struggled to breathe, making him call out to her in fear as he watched her condition worsen instead of improving. As Curious moved in to attack, Ban Yu-won kept calling her name, asking if she was okay and if she could speak. Rachel clenched her teeth and, even while suffering, grabbed Ban Yu-won by the shoulder and threw him aside, placing herself in front of Curious to face him alone. Curious snarled in frustration, admitting he had planned to cut them both down at once, then realized in shock that even with only instincts left, she had chosen to protect Ban Yu-won. He mocked Ban Yu-won, calling him foolish but strangely lucky to be paired with such an exceptional partner. In the next moment, Rachel struck decisively, slashing Curious down and ending his life. Ban Yu-won felt a sharp pain and realized that if Rachel had not shielded him, he would have been torn apart, and even now he had only escaped with a light cut. Knowing that both of them were still in danger, he urgently called Rachel to come to him, insisting they treat her wound before the next shift began, his voice filled with fear and concern as he kept calling her name. Rachel clenched her teeth and threw Ban Yu-won away, and he looked on in shock, realizing she had not been neutralized at all. On the contrary, her power seemed to be rising even higher, and he could not understand why. He shouted in frustration as the shift began, and they were transported to floor 17, facing the monsters known as masked goblins. Without hesitation, Rachel rushed forward and attacked the goblins with fierce determination. Ban Yu-won thought in despair that his plan had failed and he could not stop her no matter what. He blamed himself for relying on his powers without thinking carefully and for trying to manipulate Rachel's worries instead of understanding her properly. He wondered if he had been just an arrogant fool, but he realized it did not matter anymore because with Light and DONGHUA already eliminated, the expedition was essentially a failure and there was no reason to continue. As he was lost in his thoughts, a goblin shot an arrow at him, but Rachel instinctively appeared in front of it, taking the hit in her arm. He called her name in surprise and saw that she was still fighting, risking herself just to protect him. Ban Yu-won remembered Rachel's words when she had trusted him completely and promised to follow everything he said. He murmured to himself that the expedition had failed and everything was in chaos, but he could not let it end like this. He knew it was good that he had not given up, but the situation had not improved, and he needed to figure out how to bring Rachel back to her normal self. He realized that recklessly using the furnace was not the answer because Rachel was not going berserk because of it. Normally she was loyal, obedient, and dependent, but now she behaved like a wild beast charging into danger. He reminded himself that just because she acted like a beast did not mean she could not be tamed, because she had always shown humanity in her usual state. He wondered if the problem was the way he was trying to communicate, and thought about the meaning of submission, realizing it meant to be dominated. He remembered what DONGHUA had said, that from the perspective of someone being dominated it might feel repulsive, but some people actually found peace under strong leadership. Ban Yu-won understood that Rachel, like the beast, needed someone extremely strong and controlling to truly dominate her, and that trying to reason with her gently while she became uncommunicative was the wrong approach. Ban Yu-won realized that communication was still possible, but his way of reaching Rachel had been clumsy, and if his voice could not reach her, then he had no choice but to respond in the way she wanted. He stepped in and blocked her attack, shouting for her to stop and explaining that only one goblin remained, and that killing it would push them to the next floor where both of them would be finished, so they needed to stop, heal, and prepare instead. When the goblin rushed forward, he kicked it away and firmly told it to stay still, showing that he was serious. Rachel continued to charge, and Ban Yu-won accepted that she would not listen, so he decided to use another method. He summoned a rope and slammed it into the ground, ordering her to back off and stop. He pointed to a chair, patted it, and commanded her to sit, and although she screamed, she still obeyed and sat down. He told her to be quiet, then extended his hand and asked for her paw, and she placed her hand in his without resistance. He praised her gently and patted her head, noticing in shock that her hair color was already changing and realizing the effect was far stronger than he had expected. Rachel softly called his name with a blush, and Ban Yu-won felt relief as he recognized that she had returned to herself. She hugged him tightly and declared that he was the only one in her world and her master, causing Ban Yu-won to collapse in confusion as his head throbbed and he struggled to understand what had just happened. At that moment, a screen appeared and announced that the concept of submission had been fully established. Rachel suddenly woke up, and Ban Yu-won asked her if she was awake. She immediately checked on him, worried if he was hurt anywhere, and he reassured her that he was fine and that the potion he had given her while she was unconscious had worked. Rachel smiled and said she felt much better and realized once again that Ban had saved her, feeling that she had only been a burden to him. Ban Yu-won patted her head and told her not to worry, apologizing for taking so long to understand the messages she had been sending him and admitting that if he had realized sooner, he could have solved her problem quickly. Rachel thanked him with a smile, saying she was grateful that he had kept his promise and stopped her, calling him her master, which shocked Ban Yu-won. He tried to explain that the title was not right and that calling him master could cause problems with his family, thinking about how they would disown him if they found out. Rachel asked him why it was wrong, and he just told her to take a break and talk things out while feeling overwhelmed by how close she was. She explained that she was born a beastkin with an extraordinary bloodline and that her father had been a constellation contractor who regretted the contract. but the constellation had placed a curse-like blessing on her to preserve the bloodline. Ben Yu-won realized that what she was describing must be related to the furnace of heart. Rachel nodded and explained that the furnace of heart was a power that burned emotions to gain strength, but at the same time became overwhelmed by those emotions. From a young age, whenever her wild beastkin nature surfaced, the furnace ignited her feelings and spread uncontrollable rage around her. With a body that inherited such a powerful bloodline, there were very few who could restrain it, and because of her, people around her were often hurt and suffered. To prevent that, she had tried her best to suppress her wild instincts and hide her emotions, and the more she did so, the more passive she became. Ben Yu-won finally understood why she had always acted so reserved, realizing that once the furnace ignited the emotions tied to her instincts, she would lose control, making suppression a habit. He asked if that was why she had enrolled in the union, hoping to meet a constellation linked to her bloodline and release the furnace. Rachel denied it, saying that neither she nor her father ever wanted anything to do with the constellations, and that she had come seeking a far better method. When Ban Yu-won asked what that method was, she explained that it was forming a master and servant bond through submission, an instinct engraved in the souls of beastkin. By obeying the master's commands, everything became secondary to that will, and the master's wishes took priority over all else. She explained that this was why Ban Yu-won had been able to control the furnace, and as long as he continued to wish for her not to go berserk, the furnace would not burn her emotions to activate. Ban Yu-won wondered why his command had been the one that worked and asked why she could not choose someone else as her master. Rachel explained that for a beastkin to truly serve someone, an absolute condition had to be met, and the master's soul had to be far higher in rank than the servant's. She calmly stated that her own soul rank was exceptionally high due to the constellation's curse she was born with, which made it impossible for her to accept just anyone, even among the strongest gathered at the union. Ben Yu-won thought back to his own awakening and realized that his soul depth had already been very high back then and was now far above hers, meaning he perfectly met the conditions required. Rachel then confessed that the moment she first saw him, she felt that if it was this man, she could serve him as her master, and that it was the first time she had ever felt that way. She said she was truly grateful that Ban Yu-won had made his decision before it was too late. Feeling shy, he said that the word decision felt a little too heavy, but Rachel replied that it could not be helped because for the first time in her life she no longer had to suppress herself. She could smile, cry, and act with passion, and all of that was thanks to him, adding that even if it felt heavy, he would surely take responsibility. Ban Yu-won accepted it with a small smile. Rachel stood up with renewed energy and suggested they continue climbing together, saying she could now control the furnace at will. Ban Yu-won stopped her for a moment and offered her the wild instinct energy he had gathered so far, including what he had taken from the orc earlier, saying it was not much but he wanted her to have it. Rachel was surprised and moved by the strength of the energy and accepted it, and as she absorbed it, she became filled with excitement and confidence, shouting that she wanted to hurry and fight because she was no longer afraid of anything. Ban Yu-won nodded in agreement, ready to move forward with her. When they returned, Professor Yamina welcomed them back and praised their efforts. She explained that she had planned to hear the full story from the first two who came back, but they had gone straight to the training room before she could talk to them, and she wondered if something had happened between them. Ban Yu-won assured her that there was no issue between the two and asked how much she had heard. Professor Yamina said she only knew that they had captured the intruder, and that she had been shocked when she saw the footage because no one expected a second attack so soon after the events of last week. She noted that encounters with intruders had a higher fatality rate than most irregularities, and that while everyone had returned safely, it would not have been surprising if someone had died, so she was very glad they were all safe. Ban Yu-won said they had been very lucky and asked what she thought the intruder's goal had been. She explained that he was definitely not from the academy but seemed to qualify as a climber, probably because they had become promising talents, and someone wanted to stop them early. She added that once someone was associated with a constellation, they attracted attention, and because Ban Yu-won was an especially unique case who had refused a constellation contract, he had strong will and great potential, which meant many constellations desired him or were watching closely. She confirmed from the video that the attacker was part of Exodus, and Ban Yu-won nodded in agreement. Professor Yamina explained that Exodus was a notorious group of dimensional pirates and the largest group invading the tower, backed by constellations that were extremely radical and violent. She said talented people like Ban Yu-won, who clearly would not form contracts with them, probably irritated Exodus, and she admitted she had not expected them to try to eliminate him outright so soon. Ban Yu-won thought about the intruder's methods and realized that it had been a simple trick, but if they had not noticed, someone definitely would have died. He reflected that they only survived because of their high specs and sensory abilities, and that any other regular freshman party would have been wiped out. Anger boiled in him as he thought about how many people Exodus had likely killed in this way, and that constellations had been backing them and interfering with them since the last expedition, which had also caused Rachel so much pain. He felt a strong desire to crush both Exodus and the constellations, unable to forgive them. Professor Yamina noted that his expression was scary, and he apologized, saying he did not mean to. She reassured him that if she were in his place, she would feel the same. Ban Yu-won told her that no one could control what happened inside the tower and asked what they should do with this week's tower footage. She suggested uploading it so that their plan would fail and prevent them from acting out for a while. Ban Yu-won stood up, saying that now that everything was settled he would head out, and she nodded, acknowledging him as Yu-won. Ban Yu-won thought to himself that nothing good ever came from dealing with constellations, and after only 2 experiences he was already tired of it, doubting he would ever form a contract with one in the future. Professor Yamina thought that was a wise decision but noted that some constellations did treat their contractors well, though she quickly dismissed it and said it was nothing, adding that she had a suggestion for him before he left. Later, Dako stopped Light from leaving, saying he still needed more training, but Ban Yu-won reminded her that overworking him was not good and suggested they step outside for some fresh air and properly wrap up after the tower incident. Light trembled, asking if he had really messed up, and Ban Yu-won told him bluntly that he had, explaining that if it were not for his mistake the day before, they could have reached room 20. Light insisted it had been an accident, but Dako scolded him, saying he had clearly not learned his lesson, which made Light realize his fault and apologize sincerely to everyone. Ban Yu-won told Dako that Light was reflecting on his actions, so they should ease up a bit, and she agreed, but only if she received 2 gifts she had been promised at the tower. Ban Yu-won smiled and told her to choose anything she wanted. The scene shifted to the City of Flowers, Ronica, where Dako tried on new flowy clothes and asked if they suited her, noting that her normal combat uniform was flimsy. Light commented that the new outfit was much better, and Ban Yu-won assured her that it suited her perfectly. Dako hesitated but accepted his opinion, and he suggested trying another outfit next. Meanwhile, Rachel watched them gritting her teeth, upset that Dako was treating Ban Yu-won as if he were a servant. Light noticed her reaction and warned Ban Yu-won to pay attention. Dako thought that even though she did not know the style well, the outfits he had picked were to her liking and she enjoyed being able to choose clothes freely. Rachel angrily called Dako a greedy pig, which made Dako snap back, asking what she had just said and calling her a beast. Rachel tried to feed Ban Yu-won, but he became flustered and said he could eat by himself. Dako said they could now assume the beast going berserk in battle was resolved, and Ban Yu-won agreed. Rachel felt happy and praised Yu-won for solving it perfectly. Dako said it was a good thing and better than having someone who could not be controlled at all. Light joked that he was now the only weak link in the party. Ban Yu-won asked Dako what she did to make Light call himself that. Dako replied that Light was more like a ticking time bomb and said everyone felt it, especially because the sword was a serious problem. Then she asked Light if he had anything to say about what happened. Light said nothing and admitted his behavior had felt unnatural, and he said he would try to fight without relying on the holy sword if possible. Ban Yu-won thought that Light was missing the point and was still hiding his problems from them. Dako scolded Ban Yu-won for just watching and told him to do something since he shared a room with Light. Then she shook him and told him to try seducing Light like he did with the beast. Rachel worriedly asked Ban Yu-won if he was okay. Ban Yu-won thought it felt like some legendary sound transmission technique. Dako said that if they kept treating Light gently, he would only stay stubborn and keep hiding things, and she reminded Ban Yu-won how well he had handled the beast and questioned why he could not do the same with Light. Ban Yu-won thought he wanted to get along with Rachel but not in this strange way, and he felt confused because Light was a man too and he did not know what he was supposed to do. Dako continued scolding him and said he was the one who insisted on bringing both of them along, and she warned him not to think he was free of responsibility. He then told everyone that they probably had not seen the notice about next week's external special activity and said he would send it to their devices. Ban Yu-won confirmed it and explained it was a large off-campus activity involving both students and faculty. Dako wondered if the union usually did public service work like that. Light reacted angrily and read out the explanation, complaining about how the lower dimension was being treated as if it could not survive without the higher one. Dako calmly told Light that if he wanted to become the god of all dimensions, he needed that kind of viewpoint and should not twist its meaning. Light accepted it and said it was just another training step toward godhood. Ban Yu-won thought he had felt for a while that Light showed hostility toward the higher dimension and guessed something serious must have happened in Light's world, deciding he would hear the full story someday. He then made another announcement and said he would start taking Professor Yumina's magic combat class and would have to train alone for a while. The others immediately shouted in shock and complained about why he was only telling them now. A few days later at the martial arts arena, Ban Yu-won complained to the magic wand and warned it that if it did not cooperate, he would destroy it and absorb its concept because he could not afford to fail the next lecture. He slammed the wand on the ground and shouted that it would be its own fault if it broke. The magic wand suddenly protested in anger and accused Ban Yu-won of forcefully rummaging inside it without permission and then trying to talk casually. Ban Yu-won was confused and asked if it meant his Babylon Code ability. The wand angrily criticized that violent power and said magic was a sacred path built on order, and that someone who tore through it like that could never be a proper magician. Ban Yu-won brushed it off and told the wand to stop complaining and hand over the concept. The wand finally gave in, and a screen appeared showing that magic language was fully absorbed and Ban Yuan's understanding greatly increased. The wand lamented its miserable fate, saying all its power had been stolen by a thug instead of raising a great mage. Ban Yuan mocked it for talking about life when it was not even human, while thinking the concepts he received were incredibly deep and that he could now understand magic systems clearly. The wand reacted in shock when it realized something was wrong and began panicking, claiming this situation was impossible and that it was never meant to be the ego of a weapon. When Ban Yuan told it not to say anything cliché, the magic wand suddenly shouted that it had once been human. Ban Yuan said that everything the magic wand was saying sounded extremely familiar and felt like something taken straight out of novels and comics. The magic wand angrily denied it and insisted it was not fiction, saying it had once been a real human who was betrayed by people it trusted and sealed inside the staff. It explained that false memories were planted to reduce its existence, and that when Ban Yuan absorbed its power, the core seal was broken, allowing its memories and abilities to start returning. Ban Yuan asked if its memory and power had fully recovered, but the wand said it was still incomplete because it had been sealed for too long. Ban Yuan thought that being sealed for centuries must have been extraordinary from the start, especially since a staff found in a low-ranked room held 200 soul power, placing it on the same level as Rachel, who was said to be born on a completely different tier. The magic wand became consumed by hatred and swore to take revenge no matter the cost, vowing to reclaim its power and hunt down those who betrayed it. As Ban Yuan noticed it changing shape, the wand fully transformed into a magic staff. The staff then erupted with violent intent and declared it would kill everyone responsible and burn them all alive. Ban Yuan thought the situation suddenly felt like it had shifted from something childish to an overly dramatic story. A screen appeared showing the name Tier of Selen, with both magic power and soul power rising sharply. Ban Yuan noticed a large increase in its stats. The staff said it could not remember anything more and that this was its current limit. Ban Yuan asked if that meant it could still grow stronger, and confirmed it was not just beginner-level gear. The staff reacted angrily, offended at being called a beginner, and insisted it was far beyond teaching basic magic and should never be used for low-level work. Ban Yuan thought that along with its memories, its bad temper had also returned. He then calmly proposed a deal, saying that if Selen helped him, he would help it recover its memories and power and also assist in getting its revenge. The next day before the magic combat class, Rachel smiled and asked if she could come along and quietly stay beside Ban Yuan, promising to behave. At the same time, Light said he had been thinking and felt it was wrong that he could not use the holy sword, insisting it was his greatest strength. Ban Yuan immediately rejected both ideas and loudly told DONGHUA to take the two of them away. Dako, already in a bad mood, said this worked out fine and dragged both Rachel and Light away with her. Ban Yuan felt relieved to finally be alone and focused on the student ID teleportation structure, tracing the concept of spatial transfer and extracting only the coordinate variable. He thought that his insight combined with Selen's power worked well with coordinate formulas, allowing him to break down and rebuild spells he could not understand before. After inputting the memorized coordinates and activating the trigger, he was shocked to realize he was teleporting and quietly celebrated when it worked. A girl nearby asked in surprise if he had really teleported just now. Ban Yuan smiled and said it was a feature of the student ID. He then pointed out that she had noticed the changed coordinates. She asked how he did it, and he casually replied that he used magic power. She was stunned and questioned how he could read and alter the complex code written by the headmaster, especially changing only the teleport coordinates. Ban Yuan became confused and wondered if he had done something wrong and who the girl was. At that moment, Professor Yamina arrived, startling him. She praised Ban Yuan for finding the classroom on his own after forgetting to tell him the location, and said she was about to come get him. She also noted that student Air was there, and told them to go inside together. Air politely bowed in response. Ban Yuan thanked Professor Yamina for earlier and remarked that he had not met someone that bold since DONGHUA. Professor Yamina replied lightly that she would rather avoid triggering another heroine-type event and suggested they head inside together. Professor Yamina announced that a new student was joining the class and introduced Ban Yuan from Class 11, asking everyone to welcome him with applause. Ban Yuan greeted the class and said he looked forward to studying with them. He thought the situation was as expected and noticed there were only 9 students in total, meaning very few could truly use magic. His attention went to Air, who was sitting alone, and he felt a strange distance between her and the others, like an invisible wall. His thoughts briefly drifted to past conversations about DONGHUA and Orduma, which he found hard to believe. One student raised her hand and asked Professor Yamina why Ban Yuan had not attended the class earlier if he could use magic. Professor Yamina explained that during a recent exploration, Ban Yuan obtained a magic artifact and became its master, which awakened his talent as a mage. She teasingly added that the student should check the exploration video on the Rebellion channel, mentioning that she appeared in it as well. The students began murmuring excitedly, saying they were already subscribed. Ban Yuan quietly thought that the professor was doing all the promotion work herself. Professor Yamina thought that although all the students were chosen for their excellence, even they would have never seen a case like this, since being born with magical talent was extremely rare, and it was natural for them to find it hard to believe. She then explained that sometimes hidden talents awakened under special circumstances. A student excitedly suggested that Ban Yuan should show some magic without using the artifact, wanting to see what late awakening talent looked like. Ban Yuan said he was fine with it, and politely warned that he had only just started learning magic. Professor Yamina worried to herself since he had only obtained the artifact last week. Ban Yuan asked everyone to keep in mind that he could not perform anything too complex. He thought that since he only knew a few spells, it was best to use something simple and common, and he chose air as the base element. He calmly formed the magic using rotation and flame attributes, creating a fast and powerful fiery vortex beam. The students reacted in shock, amazed by its speed and the fact that he did not chant any incantation, saying it looked more like a superpower than magic. One student realized it was intention-based magic that did not require chanting. Professor Yamina stopped him and praised the demonstration, saying both the lack of chanting and the power were impressive and hard to believe for a beginner. The students began reacting in mixed ways, with some calling it special admission talent and others feeling frustrated, while a few tried to downplay it as just basic elemental magic. Professor Yamina ended the welcome and said it was time to start the actual class. Ban Yuan thought that Air was clearly a top student and felt someone like him would not easily catch her interest. After class ended, Air stopped him and asked him to wait. Ban Yuan was confused and asked what she wanted. Air said he still had not answered her question. The other students began murmuring in surprise that Air was talking to the special admission student. Ban Yuan replied that he thought he had already answered earlier. Air repeated her doubt and pointed out that he had analyzed and interfered with all the codes set by the headmaster. Ban Yuan casually asked if that was really so difficult. Air said she could understand it if he had gained editing access to the teleportation coordinates, but she could not believe someone like him could do it directly. At that moment, Professor Yamina called out to Air and then explained that Ban Yuan had a scheduled meeting. She also clarified that Ban Yuan had never been given any editing privileges, since that level of access was only allowed for full professors. Air realized that meant he had done everything with his own ability. Professor Yamina said that should answer her question and told them she would see them during the special activities the next day. She then asked Ban Yuan to come with her, and he nodded in agreement. Professor Yamina asked Ban Yuan if he had edited the functions of his student ID. Ban Yuan admitted that he tried it and asked if it was forbidden. She explained that student IDs were refined fragments of power from the tower, and as long as he did not break it, the headmaster would not mind, especially since editing one at a student's level was considered impossible. Ban Yuan realized this was why someone had questioned him so urgently earlier and felt it was strange for a stranger to approach him like that. He then asked if the professor was happy about what he had done. Professor Yamina smiled and said she believed from the start that his abilities suited magic, and that he had already done something impressive as soon as his magic awakened. Ban Yuan worried that he was being taken away because of this, but she denied it and said the headmaster would not summon someone over such a small matter. When Ban Yuan realized the meeting was with the headmaster and not the professor, he shouted in shock. Professor Yamina confirmed it and suddenly pushed him into a dark portal, wishing him luck. Ban Yuan thought in surprise that this was happening again and complained internally as he fell into another room. An old man welcomed him and commented that he seemed to have grown close to Professor Yamina, asking him to keep it secret. Ban Yuan noticed it was a butler doll this time and replied carefully, saying that since this was a meeting with the master, he should be even more cautious about hiding the fact that it was happening. The old man told Ban Yuan that keeping the meeting secret would not be a problem and then asked about his plans for choosing a major, since the first year was for general studies and the second year required a decision. Ban Yuan thought it was sudden and realized he had been too busy with martial arts, climbing the tower, school, sparring, and awakening his magic to think about it. He decided that he would choose a major that allowed him to stay close to his current classmates from class 11. The old man questioned whether he would really pass up other talented students and professors to stay with them. Ban Yuan explained that he knew his own abilities best and could develop them most effectively by moving forward with his classmates, and he trusted that Professor Yamina would make time for him no matter his choice. The old man asked if he intended to place a burden on her, and Ban Yuan clarified that it was not that, but that he wanted to live up to her high expectations. The old man acknowledged that her expectations were indeed high, but hinted that her actions were not only for the sake of her students' success. Ban Yuan was surprised and asked what he meant, but the old man chose not to explain further and said he would wait and see. He then shifted the topic to the selection of the destination for the special activity, mentioning that a powerful family had exerted significant influence. Ban Yuan wondered why the conversation had suddenly shifted to the special activity and the influence of a powerful family. The old man explained that the family in question was Ortama and that they would be very obsessed with the activity. Ban Yuan asked if special activities were not decided by the headmaster, and the old man explained that many patrons supported the academy and some allowance for interference was necessary to avoid backlash. Ban Yuan questioned whether outsiders could meddle with the tower or the students, and the old man clarified that on-campus activities were fully protected, but off-campus activities required some leniency, which kept patrons satisfied and supportive. Ben Yuan concluded that Ortama must be plotting something through the special activity and accused the master of selling them out. The old man denied this, saying he had only heard rumors and nothing more. Ben Yuan thought this was practically the same thing and grew frustrated at the vague explanation, realizing he needed a plan immediately, and asked for more details about Ortama's plot. The old man refused, saying even this much was excessive interference, and he had no intention of revealing more. Ben Yuan said he understood and remembered an important errand he needed to do. The old man warned that the academy's secrets must not be shared with anyone. Ben Yuan promised to keep the information secret but asked if he could still discuss the possibility of danger, and the old man agreed, adding that there was still more he needed to give him. The old man said he had been watching Ben Yuan closely for the past 2 weeks and praised how smoothly he proved his skills and gained recognition. He said he had very high expectations for him and saw a value that went beyond normal standards, so he decided to give him a small gift. Ben Yuan realized this was the same person from the entrance ceremony. As the old man spoke, Ben Yuan was granted the concept of solidity, and a message appeared showing that he was deeply mastering it. Ben Yuan felt something bloom inside his body the moment it happened. More messages followed, explaining that the will of the Absolute affected his physical body, increasing its depth before forcing a powerful transformation through his divine manifestation art. His body was intensely stimulated, negative concepts were erased, and a surplus of life energy was created. His divine manifestation art reached a much higher level, and the excess potential began supporting the growth of other concepts. Ben Yuan realized that his manifestation had completely changed and was shocked that even the quality of his magical power had improved again as his values increased. A voice from a portal praised Ben Yuan, saying it had only intended to help him resist a certain power by engraving it onto his body, but he had gained something far beyond expectation. The voice explained it was the ability of Ortama, the power to impose one's will on the world, which was still young and weak, but most people would submit to it. Ben Yuan said he had a good friend whose gift worked well with the master's blessing. The voice told him to be grateful and opened the way for him to go, and Ben Yuan thanked it. The next morning, on the day of the special activity, Ben Yuan checked that everyone had remembered important items like tissues, a mirror, and drinks. Rachel teased him, saying he sounded like a father sending kids off on a picnic, and Light said he was worrying too much. Ben Yuan replied that he could not help worrying if he were responsible for them, since they all seemed carefree. Diako warned him not to let anyone act recklessly, while Rachel said she would be fine because he was there, and Light said he always stayed aware of the battlefield. People in the crowd murmured excitedly, recognizing them as the rebellion and commenting on how much prettier they looked in person. Diako praised Ben Yuan for starting the channel, and he agreed, thinking it had helped him gain support. Diako noted that lately, they had started receiving admiration and goodwill from the regular students, at least outside the special class. Ben Yuan agreed with what had been said, and Professor Yamina asked if everyone had eaten a good breakfast. Ben Yuan said yes, and when she asked if they were fully prepared, he nodded. She smiled and suggested they dress up a little since it was a rare day out, giving each of them a pretty rose that would protect them wherever they went. Ben Yuan commented that it was a bit too conspicuous even for class 11, and Diako complained about how they were supposed to walk around wearing it. The professor explained that the rose should not be removed and was a protective measure for the special activity, but she added that it could be changed into any form they liked, surprising everyone. Diako gritted her teeth and said she wished it had been possible from the start. Professor Zenon then announced that everyone had gathered and the special activity would begin, instructing first years from Class 1 to board the Dimension ship in order. Light questioned how they could board a spaceship, and Professor Yamina explained that for large-scale special activities, the Dimension ship was summoned directly from the auditorium by the headmaster and Professor Zenon. Rachel commented that the ship was huge, and Ben Yuan noted he had not seen anything like it since the entrance ceremony. Professor Yamina then announced that it was time for Class 11's special activity to begin.